Good evening everyone, welcome to the council meeting. I declare the meeting open at 6 o'clock and I'd like to start by acknowledging that tonight we meet on the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Just to note that we do have a Councillor Jonathan Hallett on an approved leave of absence this evening, and we are expecting Councillor Dan Loden and Councillor Rosalind Harley. So we'll proceed. We do have a quorum, and I'll go straight to public question time. So welcome members of the public gallery. I see we have an eager participant tonight. I just ask that when you do come forward, agenda is applications for leave of absence. CEO, do we have any? Councillor Gontaszewski, have you put in your leave of absence?
Submitted via email to the CEO.
Okay. Do you recall the dates off the top of your head? We could do it verbally.
It is Monday the 8th until Sunday the 20th of July. But let's make it the 21st because that's what it says in the agenda. I will return on Monday to council business on Monday the 21st of July.
Okay, so we have a request for a leave of absence from Councillor Gontaszewski from Monday the 8th through to Monday the 21st of July. Could I please have a mover and seconder for this item? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Loden. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Anyone else wish to take leave? No? Okay. Great. The next item is receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations. We have none. Confirmation of minutes. My apologies, we do need to go back because Councillor Jonathan Hallett has also requested his current leave of absence. So I'll just take us back first to item 4. We do have a second request for Councillor Jonathan Hallett to take a leave of absence from the 19th of June to the 3rd of July due to personal commitment. So can I also have a mover and seconder for that request? Move Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Loden. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Now moving on to item 6, ordinary confirmation of minutes for the ordinary council meeting of the 28th of May 2019. Could I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Move Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Castle. All those in favour? I declare the minutes carried. That takes me to announcements by the presiding member. So I do have a few announcements this evening. First of all, I just wanted to talk about pop-up play. This is a trial of play that is supposed to be very creative and free, low cost to deliver, so that we can test it out for our youth community in Vincent. It is an area that was identified in our public open space strategy as a gap, in that we do have play equipment for younger children, but that we do have a gap when it comes to our older kids and teenagers, and that we need to provide more challenging play for those age groups. So the city has been rolling out a series of pop-up plays around at our reserves. We've done some free play at Woodville Reserve where the kids are building things out of logs and pallets and whatever else they can get their hands on. The city's been supplying raw materials to those children, and they've been constructing and building and digging tracks. And most recently is that we're rolling out a bike trail and pump track at Britannia Reserve. And despite the fact that we've probably only done about half of the trail, kids, dads, mums are out there riding it, building jumps with logs that the main roads have given us for free, and it's fantastic to see that the community is really embracing that and have been really excited by it. So that's something that we'll continue to do. We're also looking at parkour equipment, which is bars that kids love to hang off and jump on. Also just to note that on the 15th of June we opened North Perth Common, which was a really great event. It was a good turnout from the community and a really nice demonstration of how that new community space in the heart of North Perth can be used. It is designed to be flexible, so it can be closed to cars regularly for events, designed to be iconic through the big circular light structure, which looks quite striking but also projects artwork onto the ground, and a people-friendly space. So we are seeing how it works. We're doing a bit of a 3-month test to see whether it needs any tweaks, and that will come back to council to see what else we can do. We're putting some additional seating in so we can encourage people to use the grassed area and enjoy that space. Also to note that on the Saturday the 6th of July we will be having the Kayawandu Festival at the North Perth Town Hall in partnership with Noongar Radio, who are our Vincent locals. We'll be celebrating NAIDOC Week, Noongar Radio's 10th birthday, and the launch of our new Innovate Reconciliation Action Plan. And if you wouldn't mind giving me a bit of extra time, I would like to talk about someone who is leaving us tomorrow, Mick Quirk. So I just wanted to make a few comments because our Director of Community and Business, Mick, is leaving us at the City of Vincent tomorrow after just over 3 years' service with us here in the City of Vincent, and moving on to an amazing career opportunity at our neighbours over in the City of Stirling, where he's taking up the role of Director of Community Development, which I think has a staffing quota of more than the whole of the City of Vincent. So a great career progression for Mick. Just wanted to say thank you for all that you've achieved, all that you've sweated over, the late nights, the highs and lows of local government life. You are someone that really embraces and understands community life. You talk the talk, you walk the walk. You have great community relationships. You're an awesome negotiator and builder of relationships and rebuilder of relationships when they get broken. You're very personable and genuine and show great compassion for your role in our community. And you've always displayed a really good sense of humour. Only very rarely have I seen you get hot under the collar. You're very, very calm in your disposition. You really understand and get community context, and that's really important to us here in the City of Vincent. And I think it's about the way you approach your work. You're very on the ground. You reach out to people. You will go out to where people play sport, work, have their community groups, and I think that you're really good at taking down those barriers, seeing opportunities and working in a way that we really need to embrace in local government. You've also written the best emails I've probably ever seen, in that you demonstrate great empathy, but you can also be very firm. You've also taught me personally probably much that I know about sport, so thank you for that. And I understand from the staff that you're also very good at sport. They describe you as surprisingly sprinty sporty spice at team cricket and netball events. You've delivered some really fantastic outcomes for us here in the City of Vincent, and some of the more memorable or really impactful for me are the public open space strategy, which is really just now informing all that we do with our parks and open spaces. You refocused our customer service. You've done amazing work in the area of reconciliation. You've developed new and deeper partnerships with our sporting clubs, Noongar outreach services, Anzac Cottage, with our LGBTQI partners, with Perth Mosque, the St Patrick's Day Committee. The work that you've done with Space to Co has been innovative in opening up our halls to people where we've seen the spin effects rolling through. We're now trying to encourage more people to use the many buildings that we have across the City of Vincent through innovation. And I think you've always taken a fair and human approach to parking infringements. You have dealt with some tricky issues during your time here at the City of Vincent, including the selling of the community bus, negotiating the ultimate deal between the Friends of Anzac Cottage and the Vietnam veterans. No mean feat. Building bridges with Subiaco and East Freo footy clubs, who are now amongst our friends. And turning a corner with Floreathena, where we are now seeing our club turn out in force and talking with us about a brave way forward, which is fantastic to see. So we did have a bit of a chat to some of the people that have worked with you out in the community, and I have a whole page here full of glowing comments, so I'll just try to pick out some of the key bits, otherwise we might be here all evening. But we spoke to John Thompson at Oxford Foyer, which is our homelessness project just down here on the corner of Oxford Street and Vincent. He said he's always found Mick to be responsive, kind and generous with his time. He listened to requests from John about gender diversity in the city's forms, to the temporary parking permits we desperately needed to help facilitate necessary construction works. He notes that Mick's departure comes just before a review of the parking permits in Leederville, but he's sure that's just a coincidence. John says, thank you for your support for your Oxford and for your contribution to the successful transition of over 500 young people from homelessness to independence. Peter Capes, chair of the Subiaco Football Club and member of Leederville Connect, says on more than one occasion he tried to convert Mick to the Lions, who, as it happens, appear to be on a pretty good roll in the last 20 or so years, Mick. Other than a bit of footy fun, Peter says he'll no doubt miss you, that you've always made yourself available, and even when the conversations were a bit tough, you didn't shirk the issue. Together, you now have a great understanding with the COV, City of Vincent, and good working relationships across a wide range of people, and that is mostly thanks to the work that Mick has done. So he says, well done on your new position, and next time we flog the Sharks, you'll be front of mind. Anne Chappell and Pete Ramsey from Friends of Anzac Cottage says that it was you and the Memorandum of Inspiration that inspired us and gave us confidence that we needed to stick our necks out, and that you are now officially part of the Anzac Cottage story. Thank you, Mick. And Andrew Rigg over at the YMCA HQ has said that you've always been very supportive of the work that they do over there, always available to help sort out issues and provide support when required, and has always enjoyed working with you, and wish you all the best. So, Mick, thank you so much for your time with us. We would have liked more than 3 years, but we just have to be grateful for the time that we have had you, and we wish you every success on your amazing career journey in local government. It is absolutely fantastic that you're staying in the sector, because we need people like you in local government. So thank you. Would you like a right of reply?
I need to say that the Vincent community is fantastic, and it's led by an amazing council, so it's been a privilege to serve both the community and council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mick. I'll now go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. The declarations are as outlined in the agenda and as per the briefing session last week, and I'll summarise them. The first from Mayor Emma Cole's impartiality interest in relation to item 9.5, numbers 77 and 79 Anzac Road. An impartiality interest from Councillor Dan Loden in relation to item 11.7 Floridafina Football Club. There's 3 declarations of interest in relation to the community budget submissions, item 12.2. The first from Emma Cole's an impartiality interest. The second is from Councillor Castle, financial interest, and the third from Councillor Loden, an impartiality interest.
Thank you, CEO. In addition to the items that have been raised by members of the public gallery and those that are absolute majority decisions required, which is items 11.4, 12.6 and 13.1. I'll now go around the room to see if there are any other items that council members wish to pull out for debate. Councillor Castle.
9.6 and 10.3. Thank you.
Councillor Harley.
9.4, ma'am.
Councillor Murphy. Councillor Loden.
9.7 and 11.6.
Thank you. Councillor Fotakis.
No, Mayor, but I think you might have forgotten 12.5's absolute majority decision as well. On my list.
Oh, yes, thank you. I think the issue is that they're not noted in the actual agenda, but yes, we'll grab that one too. Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So 10.1, 11.5, 12.4, and I just will also note that there is someone in the gallery who's awaiting 12.5, so if we can put that at the end of those that were spoken to in the gallery rather than waiting for it to come up in order, that would be appreciated.
Okay. Sure. Councillor Gondaszewski?
Just 12.1, please.
I'm just going to check that all of the items that have got amendments on the table have also been captured, so if you just bear with me for a moment.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the items proposed to be moved en bloc are item 9.5, item 10.2, items 11.1, 11.2 and 11.3, item 12.2, item 12.3 and item 12.8.
Can we move an item on block that has a declaration of financial interest?
No.
12.2?
Committee
No.
budget submissions. I believe, yeah.
Good pick up, Councillor Castle, thank you.
It's a financial interest, yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right, so
Yeah. No, there's a conflict right now.
all right, so just to recap, we've got 9.5, 10.2, 11.1, 11.2, 11.3, 12.3 and 12.8 to move on block. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gondaszewski. All those in favour? I declare the en bloc items carried. So we now go to the order in which the items were raised by members of the public gallery first. So we will be jumping around the agenda a little bit. We don't go through sequentially. So the first item raised was item 9.2, which is 539 to 545 Beaufort Street, Mount Lawley, 8-storey mixed-use development. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of very brief comments on this one. I had a lengthy discussion late this afternoon with a resident in relation to some of their concerns about the height and the fact that the building, as it presents on paper, is 2 storeys higher than what is allowable on the site. Mostly what we spoke about was the fact that planning applications and planning approvals are site-specific and assessed on their merits. And I think what's interesting about this architecturally, before you get above really the first floor, is if you take the corner itself and as you come down the street on Harold Street, and the requirement to provide car parking off the right of way, plus the requirement to activate the frontage on Beaufort Street, that's pretty much the first 2 levels taken care of. and the need to provide the parking that's actually required, and the inability in that part of the world to be able to dig a decent basement means you pretty much can only have the uses that are proposed on the first, what it becomes the first floor. It also effectively fronts 3 streets, being Harold, Beaufort and the recently named right-of-way, which escapes me at the moment. So effectively those first 2 levels as they present in plan at street level, any viable development pretty much needs to fill them in the way that, in some manner, in the way in which has been proposed. I also note that whilst given the topography of Beaufort Street, you'll clearly see the upper levels as you come down Beaufort Street and perhaps towards the intersection of Vincent and Harold as you come down the street. That those from ground level on Beaufort Street itself, as you're interacting with the building, those top 2 levels will be completely hidden from view. So I think that architecturally, whilst those 2 stories do exist, there is a valid reason for their existence, and it's an architectural response to the site. I will just also note that there's been some discussion about on-structure planting and some of the poor outcomes that we've seen in Vincent and elsewhere in terms of the actual results long term. I'm comfortable that the applicant has given this not only fair consideration, but it's made it an integral part of their development. I don't know that I necessarily agree with their argument about communal open space and how it's sometimes dead space, but given the orientation of the site again and the likely development of the site immediately to the north in the lifetime of this building, the opportunities for meaningful open space that would get good access to natural light in the long term, other than on the roof itself, are probably limited. So again, I think that it's been a quality design response, and certainly I'm comfortable that the planning conditions that are proposed will mean that we will actually, perhaps among the first time of something of this size, actually see the green result that's proposed in the plans. So with that, I will be supporting the officer recommendation, and I think that the sooner it's built, the happier most people will be.
Thank you, Mayor. I am also very supportive of this application. I think it can create some concern when you review an application and you do see so many variances that come forward, particularly when they may relate to bulk parking and landscaping. However, there are challenges with the orientation of the site, with needing to relate to 3 frontages. And whilst there is a differential in height, I also note that the shadowing is primarily falling to the street. I think this is a strong design, and I think that this suits the location on the Highgate and Mount Lawley boundary. I like the mix of apartment sizes, and the design of the on-premise landscaping has the potential to create an iconic building, even if ultimately what is in place is even half of what is pictured. I think it will be quite striking from an amenity perspective to the street. And of course, I'm very pleased to see the incorporation of visitor parking via condition. I note the lack of provision of communal open space in the applicant's commentary. And I do take on board some of their points in relation to this. And the residential design codes do recognise that communal open space needs would be reduced in developments located in high amenity areas. However, in this development, it is completely reliant on the provision of balconies and open space in the public realm. Beaufort Street is a great place, but ultimately the developments in this sort of circumstance can place additional burden on the public realm relative to other types of development. And it did strike me, just as a slight tangent, that this could be where the city would benefit from an open space in lieu type arrangement where developers could make contribution to the provision and maintenance of public open spaces where an otherwise desirable development, and I do believe this is a desirable development, does not or is unable to provide open space from within. This is something that we've sort of been grappling with as to how we may work in terms of implementing our public open space strategy, and this is certainly not something that I'm considering for tonight, but it is more something that I thought of in this application. I'm looking forward to... I drive up Harold Street very regularly to Beaufort Street, and I am looking forward to seeing this building delivered on the street. So I'm very supportive of this application.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also very happy to support the officer's recommendation and support this project. I think it's a bold and quality design that's sensitive to the context, and it does address the challenges of the site extremely well, while taking advantage of the location and a high traffic route. I've never had a problem with height as such, as long as the design and the amenity, and I take the points regarding communal space, but we are in, the building is located in a high amenity area, and I know particularly for all of us, we're cognisant of the past few years being tough for retailers, and Beaufort Street being amongst that. And although we're talking years from now, an increase in the residential population is one way, and it's one way that's proven to boost retail trade. So yes, I agree with you, Councillor Topperberg, the sooner the better. And there's many examples in Sydney and Melbourne where mixed-use developments have helped resurrect dying local shopping strips, and I think this will go, in some part a way to really helping us address what is a very low residential population in that area by comparison. I think there's also an opportunity for the developer to maybe be creative with the type of tenancies introduced into the building, and hopefully work with the local community to introduce something different. So I'm happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Councillors, any further comments? Councillor Murphy.
I'll echo all the previous comments. I'm also excited to see what the city could do around the percent for art policy, and working with an innovative designer and developer to perhaps push the boundaries of that a little bit. And I love the idea. Although I am supportive of the concept of reduced communal space within a town centre, it would be interesting to see the opportunity around that potentially moving forward. So yeah, thumbs up from me.
Councillors, look, I'll just make some brief comments. I think there's a lot to love about this development. It is a highly sustainable development. I think really interesting in its approach to on-structure planting. There has been talk of achieving up to 50% canopy this way. I believe that was correct, Director. Yes. So that is really quite exciting. Using water harvesting to irrigate the deep planters that are integral to the design, and of course with maintenance being critical, it's great to see that that's already been thought through in terms of making that flow through to the strata bylaws. In terms of percent for art, this project looks to deliver around $100,000 for art on Beaufort, which would be fantastic. And I just think the design is striking. I think that it is an iconic site. It will be highly visual there, and to see something happen at this particular juncture in the life of Beaufort Street is fantastic, and I understand that there is a keenness to start construction as soon as is possible. The other queries that I raised at the briefing around the garage and parking being able to be retrofitted in the future, the floor to ceiling height satisfies that at 2.7 metres, and I think that the apartments being a well-designed, good mix, as mentioned previously, with 1 3 to 3 bedrooms. So in terms of the issue around the communal space, I think that we're in a transitioning period where Design WA has just come in. This has been a development that has been 2 years in the making, and it does have the solar array on the roof. So whilst it's not necessarily a departure for the City of Vincent to say we no longer value communal open space, that's certainly not the way that I'm perceiving this, but just perceiving this in the context of it being a development that's been developed during a transitional period, that it does have really good solar PV cells on the roof, and that has a really good high quality large balconies for the residents. So we hope that we will see good communal spaces in future developments, but on this one I'm satisfied with where this has landed, and I think this will be a very exciting contribution to Beaufort Street, and can't wait to see it start. Are there any further comments? Wish to close debate? Are there any further comments? We'll come for it. No, go for it.
I guess there's 3 things that this brings to the town centre that I think are that have been alluded to, but are essential for its survival and thriving. One is the office use, which keeps people there in the daytime, which is a key missing element from some of the town centres, not only within Vincent but broadly. The addition of 3-bedroom apartments, which I think up until 5 years ago we were never seeing them. People were just demanding yield, and we were seeing 1 and 2 bedders, but the addition of 3 bedders. And the third element is the swimming pool 26 metres above ground level, which is clearly an essential part of the way to live in the heart of Beaufort Street.
Sounds like it's going positively. Okay. All right. Now that debate has been closed, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. Congratulations, Barry. The next item raised was item 11.7, Florida Athena Football Club Incorporated Lidders Stadium Lease Progress Report. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Gondaszewski, seconded Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very pleased to see this item before us tonight and happy to support the officer recommendation. I think that we recognise that for our sporting clubs to survive and thrive, we need to be flexible and responsive to the changing landscape, both in an economic sense and also for community expectations. Looking forward to a partnership approach going forward with the club, and I think it will yield good things both for the club and for the community. So happy to support this.
Thank you. I actually have a question, either through you to the Director of Community and Business or to the CEO. Recommendation 2 talks about a working group comprising City of Vincent representatives, and among others. Can I just ask if the makeup of who those representatives will be, whether it involves elected members, staff, members of the community or otherwise? Can we just get some indication of who the City of Vincent representatives are intended to be?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the intention was for it to be administration, city officers from varying departments. The administration didn't particularly have a view that it should exclude council members, but as a working group looking at leasing issues and facility issues, it was seen as an administration-based working group.
Except that I just think that we should also just be cognisant of the fact that this is going to sit alongside, in part, the Britannia Reserve master plan and, community and council interests. But I think it's just important that we're at least cognisant of those interests as we move through that process. But as Councillor Gondaszewski said, I think it's pleasing to see this as the direction and the outcome, and I think that all involved will be the beneficiaries for the long term.
Councillors. Councillor Fotakis.
I just want to acknowledge the work that Nick and the team have done and working with the team at Florida Athena to get us to this point. It's been a long journey, and it's one in which I think a number of people doubted whether we would ever be seeing getting this far, albeit inch by inch, but I think these sort of arrangements do require some understanding and a great deal of patience and a huge amount of heart and commitment by everybody to actually keep their eye on what the outcome is, and the outcome is always doing what is best for our local community, and I think we should never lose sight of that when sometimes individual interests come to the fore. I think we should always be really thinking about what is best for our community, so I'm happy to support this.
Councillors. I'll make a few comments just to say again thank you to the Florida Athena Football Club committee members for coming out this evening. I really appreciate that, and I'm really pleased to see that there has been a shift in the way in which the City and Florida Athena Football Club are working together with Football West. It is the case that Lidders Stadium will remain the home of Florida Athena. That has never been a question. It's always been about how we move with the times in the City of Vincent, where our community is growing, that we have extreme pressures on all of our public open space, that we constantly have sporting groups knocking on our door asking to come in and play here, and a community who is making full use of every almost every grain of sand and blade of grass in the city of Vincent. So we're doing our absolute best to make the most of it. But we also note that Florida Athena has a rich and proud history at Florida Athena at Litter Stadium, and that there is a great attachment to Litter Stadium as your home, that you have built the club rooms and that you have played there for many years. We think that this is a way in which we can continue that proud tradition, working with the City of Vincent to allow some better community access, potentially even looking at where the fences need to be and if they need to be there. As you can see, we've already been building a bike trail and pump track around the back there, which the community is absolutely loving. So they really like this approach where we're opening up areas of Vincent that previously have been very underutilised, and we also want to work with you to secure the $3 million federal grant, and we see that can have benefit to the club and community, and would love to see new facilities for the club and an extension of those facilities to cater for things like female change rooms. So I think this is a very positive step forward in working together, and look forward to the next few months as we go through this process. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. The next item raised was 9.3, which is 160 to 166 Palmerston Street, Perth, change of use to motel and addition of 11 motel rooms and restaurant cafe. Councillors, can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Loden. Seconded Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Firstly, a question, just a question in relation to the gallery around the operating hours. I think the suggestion was that we could potentially amend it to be just a blanket 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. for all activities, rather than this sort of, I think it was 11 till 2, 5 till 10 for non-guests and guests unrestricted. So I just was curious, how would you enforce the clarification between who was a guest and who was not, and would it be appropriate to amend it as follows? Would there be issues from the applicant's perspective of being not permitted to operate beyond 10 p.m. for hotel guests?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the hours that have been imposed as a condition restricting opening hours for, I guess, people that aren't guests from the motel, that's really just been set out by the applicant in their application. So those hours between 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then again from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's on the basis that there is no tenant that's been confirmed or no operator. So on that basis, administration has just imposed that condition in terms of operating hours. Philosophically, no objection to allowing a greater flexibility in terms of the operating hours, as suggested, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. In terms of how that would operate practically, there is a entrance from adjacent to the reception that would service or facilitate guests to enter the premises. I guess the purpose of specifying that there is no restriction around operating hours for guests is that it would enable meals to be prepared and provided to guests of the motel, whether in their rooms potentially or within that restaurant cafe space. So we didn't want to cap or restrict that, noting that it's probably more so to restrict when the restaurant is available to the general public. So with that being said, it is possible for motel guests to enter the restaurant and cafe through that rear access next to the reception, but we'll accept and note that it could be more flexible for all guests to attend the premises.
Are you aware of any reason why the applicant wants to be able to use that space between 10 p.m. at night and 7 a.m. in the morning?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no. It's just availability to motel guests for meals as required.
I won't move the amendment, but to give you a chance to prepare it, could you prepare an amendment to the effect of of changing it just a blanket 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and I'll let others speak to the item. Cheers.
Seconded by Councillor Castle.
Can I reserve my right until after we talk about the amendment?
Okay. Do you wish to move to the amendment? Is there any comments before we move to the amendment? Councillor Toppelberg wishes to speak.
Sure. Couple of comments. So, and I appreciate that the Urbanista's representative spoke about the responsive landscape design. The only thing the landscaping is responding to is the fact that by the time it got to the planning consultant, the built form was already there. All the greenery that we see in all of the 3D representations, other than the bird's eye view of the completely enclosed pool area, is greenery that sits in the public realm. I think that the design response to the site, whilst and the feedback generally from people is that it's an improvement on what was originally proposed and an improvement on what exists there already. Sadly, there's no genuine planning basis on which to refuse this, but I think that the advice that was given at the very beginning from the DRP when this application first made it there, which was that it pretty much should start again in terms of its orientation, because the opportunities for meaningful landscaping or interaction with the street were limited. I think that is valid and probably would have benefited at that stage. Look, I do think it's better than what went out for advertising originally. I still think that there are some issues with the expansive white render and the signage may be a little bit more subjective in terms of its view, but it certainly doesn't present as something potentially iconic. I do have an issue with the landscaping. I think that the proposal for what's there pretty much nothing other than potentially tropical species will grow around the pool, because you have in real height terms, if you look at the 3-storey apartment block that exists already, you've got a 2.5-storey 3-sided building that blocks off pretty much all northern, western and eastern light, and there's a 3-storey building to the south. So we've effectively by the time it's actually come through to the city as a meaningful proposal, in my view, the opportunities for meaningful landscaping and for the amenity of both the occupants and the surrounding neighbourhood. Hi, Siri. Those opportunities are limited. I do think that there is some further opportunity. I know that there's the proposed condition about the 2 additional street trees on Palmerston Street, the section that sits in front of the existing building on Palmerston Street that currently has the 2 crocus palms that are remaining at ground level. That is just red brick paved. There's probably some more potential to get somewhere near what we are looking, and particularly as that's west facing, to get somewhere near to what we require at the city in terms of canopy coverage or landscaping presentation. That being said, struggle as I might, I have not been able to find enough to be able to vote against what's before us. It's largely compliant, but I think whilst it might be at the end a palatable outcome in terms of being better than what's currently on site, I think it's an incredible lost opportunity.
Councillor Loden. Sorry, Councillor Loden, just before you move that, I've just had a thought. The only thing I can think about for if you have motel guest access all hours, there is also the issue of breakfast, because that's usually the main meal that hotel, motel guests are offered, and I note that that often starts relatively early, so that would mean that any breakfast service for motel guests would potentially be limited. So I just thought I'd raise that. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Have you got the amendment? So I would like to, if I can get a seconder, to move the amendment that the hours of operation of the restaurant cafe shall be restricted to, you're making me think now, restricted to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Sunday, including public holidays. If I can get a seconder.
Is there a seconder for this amendment? Yes, thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Go ahead, Councillor Loden.
Thank you. I'm going to get blasted down in flames here. My intent with this is to prevent activities between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Within the restaurant for the hotel patrons, and because that is the issues that we see tend to be those later night activities, and I don't see any problems with the cafe operating between 6 a.m. and 11 a.m. plus 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., which is effectively what we're adding in terms of the ability for the cafe restaurant to operate.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a question through you to the Director, please, if I may. So what's the effect of opening hours? What's the impact in terms of preparation or otherwise? So if the approval for opening hours is from 6 a.m, does that mean that prep can be at any time? Does that mean that prep can only commence at 6? What would be the hours that, what's the impact of the opening hours, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of preparation, the condition is worded to say that the hours of operation, so it's really when it's open to the general public.
So I support the intent. I think that at the point where there's an operator, they'll probably come back with what they want their hours to be regardless, but I am mindful of my understanding is that the current operation of the motel is that people use it as a base and go on tours and other things, so it may likely see, or very possibly see, things like 5 a.m. breakfasts and the like to be leaving on early buses or otherwise, so I'm not so sure that without consulting with the applicant that the removal of the 24 of the imposition of restrictions on when motel guests can access it may mean that it'll come back before council anyway. That being said, it still has to be built and it's not a huge impost. So my only concern, I guess, about the 6 a.m. start is that it is zoned residential, it is adjacent to residences, and I don't know of any other cafes and restaurants where we have a 6 a.m. start time, which given its location on Bulwer Street may or may not have a great impact on the surrounding properties, but I'll listen to the debate.
Councillors.
Sorry, may I see the words back up on the amendment words back up on the screen?
Is that possible to have the amendment words on the screen, please?
Could I ask a question through the Chair?
Yes, of course.
Just in regards to the noise management plan, would that not cater for any noise or disruption to surrounding residents, if that's the concern?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, because that would need to be accounted for in terms of meeting the noise regulations.
Sorry, so the noise management plan would cater for that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes.
Through you, Mayor, can I just double check, please, about the hours that have been put into this motion? So the applicants asked for these specific hours, which is 11 till 2 and 5 to 10. Is that correct? And they were the hours that they were happy with. So they didn't discuss at all with us wanting to trade a morning trade or a breakfast trade or anything like that. Okay. And that's only for the hours when it's open to the public. Okay. All right. Look, I'm actually really comfortable with what's already in the report. I've got a number of views about, if aesthetics and ugliness were planning grounds for which we could refuse something, I would be voting against it, but because I think it's a very poor design outcome for that corner, which could potentially be quite an iconic corner after such a colourful past. But I'm comfortable with what the applicant has asked for. They've obviously got business reasons for why those hours are the hours they want to operate at. At some point, another operator may come back and ask us, and I think that that's a reasonable time then to know what the operating model will be for that business, and to have a look at it then. But I don't support the amendment moving it forward to 6 a.m.
Councillors, we're on the amendment. Are there any comments? You have another question?
No, I was just going to make a comment.
Yep,
My
okay.
last was a question. Yeah, I kind of agree with Councillor Harley, I think any issues to neighbours will be sorted out through the noise management plan. I don't think we need to get too finicky in determining operating hours, so won't support it.
Councillors, I just would like to ask a question. So, just in terms of the intended audience for the motel, I think there is just in terms of how they wish to use the restaurant. Is it almost like visitors can drop by and make a cup of tea at any hour of the night? Is that the sort of thing, or is this? I mean, if it was, for example, if it was just to keep it open so that people could come in through the back entrance and access certain snacks or sit in the restaurant area freely, versus if there was an emerging issue where guests at the hotel were holding loud parties all through the night in the restaurant. Can you sort of give me a response on if it was the latter, how would the city deal with that, given that there would be, under their approval, they would have unrestricted access to the restaurant? Could that be dealt with, for example, through noise regulation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the latter, that obviously wouldn't be the purpose or intent of this. How we would address it is ultimately through this noise management plan and the acoustic report, in terms of capping or ensuring that it doesn't exceed noise regulations. In saying that, my understanding of how this is intended to operate is really to facilitate meals for the guests. It wasn't specified whether the meals would only be provided within the restaurant, but I think the flexibility is intended to be there to provide the meals to guests prepared in the restaurant and provided to guests potentially in their motel rooms as well. So it would just allow that flexibility.
Thank you. Any further comments?
And just to confirm, because it's in a residential built form area, they would be required to comply with the residential noise requirements in terms of if there was an assessment undertaken. That's correct, yeah?
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct.
Councillors, any further comments? I'll just comment that I support the intent of what the amendment is seeking to do, but I'm just a little bit worried that if we put in place hours that don't work with the operation of the hotel for guests in terms of breakfast service or guests arriving late and having dinner, etc., I'm feeling that there may potentially be a need to come back and to seek to amend this condition, and given that this was agreed with the applicant, I'm probably more comfortable to leave it as is, but I understand the purpose of the amendment. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Declare it lost. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments in relation to this development? No further comments? Yes, Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, really just to echo the comments that have been made by other elected members. I did have some queries about those opening hours. I'm happy to see that there are some in there this week that went there last week, and I agree that as it reads without the amendment, that gives some limitation on the impact to the surrounding environment. So I will be supporting this application with some reservations, but supporting nonetheless.
Councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. The next item raises 9.1, 14 Orange Avenue, Perth, second storey addition and alterations to a single dwelling. Do you have a mover and seconder? Councillor Toppelberg and Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So, not a hell of a lot to say on this one. I do acknowledge that whilst it's been lengthy, the applicant themselves have also, well, certainly their representatives. I don't know how this would have gone if it had gone to a full hearing, considering that the grounds for deferral and the issues that council presented were esoteric is probably a nice way to describe it, but I do appreciate the efforts that they've gone to, and I think that the outcome is something that is, in its current form, supportable. I also note Catherine's comments in relation to issues of precedent or potential impact on the streetscape more broadly, and note that classic example is Harley Street and the being designated initially as a character retention area, and the issues of upper level setback and its visibility from the street were clearly dealt with in the design guidelines that accompany that listing. And so if that's something that's of interest in the Orange Avenue, Hope Street area, that's something the city can explore, but that needs to be community driven. But yeah, I do believe that it's a far better outcome than what we originally had, and appreciate the efforts of all involved to get there.
Councillor Goniszewski.
Thank you. This has been a long process, and it is, and I can appreciate the applicant's engagement through the process. I am pleased that there has been involvement of the design review panel, and I'm very pleased to see the back of the previous solution that was came before us at our last meeting. I note that this decision is made in the absence of a character retention policy that would set out the manner in which second stories are to present in this streetscape. And this is a streetscape I'm very fond of, and I think would absolutely be appropriate for a discussion around character retention, should that be something the community wants to pursue. I note that there's a street setback of more than 10 metres, and that this is a largely compliant design. I do believe that there will still be an impact on the streetscape. That's inevitable. But I think that the changes proposed have done enough to get me over the line with this one, so I will support the officer recommendation.
Councillors. Councillor Fotakis.
I thought I was going mad with this one when it kept coming back. It was a bit like Groundhog Day. So I'm glad to actually see that we've come to the position where we are. I'm happy to support it. I think thanks to the design review panel for their input into the design, and I have to echo the comments from Councillor Toppelberg and Councillor Goniszewski. If there ever was an example in an area for the community to consider our character retention policy, then this is one of those. There are limitations, and this was a bit of a learning curve for myself in looking at where the limitations within planning are, and I do agree with Councillor Toppelberg. Very fortunate to get it to this stage. Could have gone anywhere had it actually gone to a full hearing, so happy to actually support it.
Councillors. Just to reiterate, I'd just like to say thank you for the patience of the applicant, and the, basically it did take some time to actually make that appeal to the SAT. So there was a lot of goodwill there in terms of the patience. It did take some time to get a better outcome, and we've now had the DRP chair state that this is a better outcome. I was keen to see that the roof pitch wasn't altered, and I think this is better than the last iteration. And I think that for Peter and Catherine, again, as residents and neighbours, thank you for attending. You're not here anymore? Yes, hello. Thank you for attending numerous meetings. I hope that you're listening loud and clear. The message is, if you really want to preserve character on your street, we are asking for you to consider looking at our character retention area policy, because this is probably as far as this could go within our existing built form policy and the R codes. So if you do want a more character-driven outcome on your street, we do have that policy available, and that is something I'd strongly encourage you to look at. So there has been an improvement, and it might be that it doesn't satisfy everyone, but it's better than what we have had presented to us on previous occasions, so happy to support it. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. The next item, or the last item raised by a member of the public gallery this evening, is an item 9.4, which is number 11 Douglas Street, Perth. This is a State Administrative Tribunal Section 31 reconsideration on a proposed change of use to an unlisted use, which is dog daycare. Moved Councillor Harley, seconded Councillor Gondaszewski.
I just note there's, pardon me, 3 amendments on the table, so I'm going to move First Amendment 9.4 in relation to proposed Amendment 1.
Just before you do that, I'm just going to see if the seconder wishes to support that, or whether we'll have to go to the substantive first. Yes? Seconded by Councillor Gondaszewski.
So I'll move to proposed Amendment 1 in regards to time-limited approval.
So they're all in the same colour palette. So are you talking about the light pink? Okay. Proposed Amendment number 1 on the light pink.
Okay, I'll move proposed Amendment 1 on the light colour pink, which is time-limited approval.
Yes, you've been seconded. Do you wish to speak to it?
Sorry, who seconded? I beg your pardon? Sorry, Susie. I think it's self-explanatory. I'm not overly supportive of time-limited approvals, and if this is all accepted, I'll come back to that later. I think it's when businesses are wanting to invest, whether it's a restaurant, bar, or any other type of business, I think that time-limited approvals are difficult. However, the applicant did stand in the gallery tonight and said that they would be happy to accept the time-limited approval of 3 to 5 years. So I'll see if this first one, the 3-year one, gets supported first.
Councillor Gondaszewski.
Nothing from me. I'm supportive of the proposed amendment.
Councillor Toppelberg, please don't let that.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just to note the administration comment that in the event that this was supported, that the administration has indicated that they would suggest amending clause 3, which is continual review of the daily operations. In terms of the time-limited approval, I think that it's pretty simple. 12 months is just completely non-commercial and in my view, for a DA such as this, would effectively be a Clayton's approval. I don't think that it's possible to get started and from the date of approval to be up and running and have a viable business to have to reapply within 12 months. I'm not so sure that 3 years satisfies that, but the applicant has indicated that they would be willing to accept that. The DA itself aside, in terms of the time limit, I think this would be far more reasonable.
Councillors, we're on the 3-year time-limited approval. Are there any comments? Councillor Fotakis.
Just a question with regards to this proposed amendment and its relation back to amendment of condition 3. How does that work?
Be a separate amendment in my view.
Manager, are you happy to respond to that question?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I was waiting for the green light to respond. Ultimately,
you have the green light.
Thank you. It does relate to condition. Condition 2 and 3 are tied. If condition 2 were to be modified to extend the term of the approval, it's recommended that condition 3, which relates to the review of the operating procedure, that also be refined, more specifically to require a review within the first 6 months and then every 12 months thereafter. That's the suggestion from administration.
So just to be clear, should this amendment go through, that's an automatic change, or how do we need to proceed to ensure that if this goes through, that amendment to condition 3 also goes.
Basically, we're dealing with the amendment before us, which doesn't go to that, so it would have to be a following amendment. Yep. Any comments in relation to 3-year limited period? Just to note that I have met with some of the neighbouring, the adjoining neighbour. They do have some concerns about how this business will operate. It is an unlisted use, and I think that there is a good need for this in our city, but every time I think someone, where there has been an attempt to go, there's just a bit of hesitancy about people who are neighbouring and in the surrounding area about how it will work, what it will sound like, etc. So I think that given that it's an unlisted use, and given that the neighbouring adjoining neighbours and landholders have raised concerns, I think that having a 3-year time limit would be well received, and I think that if it's operating, and even if there are complaints, if they're not valid or they're not breaching noise regulations, then it shouldn't be seen as a threat to the business, but it would just be that if the business isn't operating in accordance with the procedures as put forward in the application, that's where any issues around continuing beyond the 3 years would arise, not simply on the basis of complaints being made without being validated. So I'm happy to support the amendment. Any further comment? Okay, I'll put amendment number 1. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Councillor Harley?
I have a further amendment which I'm going to call 1A. And my amendment is that the time limited approval be 5 years.
Is there a seconder for a 5-year time limited approval? There being no seconder, the amendment lapses. Councillor Harley?
I'll move proposed amendment number 2, which is on the, what would you call it, hot pink paper. The condition 1.3 be deleted.
And replaced with the following. Is that the one? You're not just deleting. You're not. Yes, but you're saying. Well, I'm just checking that you're not saying that you wish to delete all of 1.3. Okay, thank you. Yep, seconded by Councillor Gondaszewski. Do you wish to speak to it?
No.
Councillor Gondaszewski. Anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Just because it's got my name on it, just to explain that issues were raised around the staggering of pickups, both from the applicant's perspective and from people sharing the car park, and I actually think that extending the time to 6 p.m. will suit the customers of the doggy daycare, as well as ease any congestion around pick-up and drop-off time, which will ease any issues in the car park. So hence the amendment. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare the amendment carried. We're back to the substantive.
I'm going to propose amendment 3, that condition 1.6 be deleted.
Do I have a seconder for the amendment? Seconded Councillor Gondaszewski. Do you wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Gondaszewski. Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a question through you to the Manager, Development and Design. Because in your view, and I understand that the principle of removing the condition, but would it be prudent if that condition was removed to have replaced with a condition that said something along the lines of be in accordance with the management plan? Because I'll ask that as the question first, then maybe I'll speak to it first, then ask the question. That's probably easier. I guess the concern is that given the number of dogs, if that is removed, it leaves it open for all the dogs to arrive at once, or for there to be potentially issues.
Councillor Toppelberg, can I refer you to clause 1.1? I think that deals with the question.
No, that deals with the premises shall be used. That's the use of the premises, not the operation of it, in my reading of it. But
if you're not satisfied, continue to ask your question.
I'll ask that as the question then. So does clause 1.1 prevent the potential for there to be no management of the arrival of the dogs?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's actually condition number 3, which relates to the operational procedure. So that does include the staggering of pick-up and drop-off of dogs.
Okay, we are dealing with the amendment on the purple. Are there any further comments? This is about deletion of condition 1.6. Just to explain, the reason why I've put this forward is that that this is already covered in the daily operations and procedures, which we often call a management plan, and that given that this management plan can be reviewed within the first 6 months, and there has been a suggestion from administration that now that there is a longer operating time frame that we add every 12 months thereafter, that if there was some need to change, that could be done flexibly through that plan, whereas because this is a planning condition, it would need to come back to council for a reconsideration of a planning condition, which is just a much higher bar and could be a bit bureaucratic. So that's the purpose. It's not to take away the intent or the need or the management of the dogs as suggested in terms of pick up and drop off. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare it carried. We're back to the substantive.
Through may I have a further amendment? I would like to move an amendment that the time limited approval be for a term of 4 years.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? There being no seconder, the amendment lapses.
I'll make another amendment that there be no time limited approval and that the approval is granted without time limitations.
Is there any seconder for this amendment? There being no seconder, the amendment lapses. Does anybody wish to move the amendment as suggested by administration that clause 3 be amended to provide for the daily operations and procedures to be reviewed not only within the first 6 months but to add the words and every 12 months thereafter? Moved Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Loden. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Castle?
No, I think we've covered it.
Councillor Loden? No? Just to check that we're clear on what the amendment is that's been put forward? Yes? Okay, great. All right, Councillor Harley.
Thank you. I'd like to... I don't support this amendment. I feel... It's just my gut feeling, but it does feel like this development application is getting just an extra layer of scrutiny, which I've not actually seen before in my memory. So I'm going to ask the administration if they could give any other contemporary examples of where we impose this 12-monthly... I guess you'd call it review, and why this is needed, why the operating rules and guidelines and all the other rules, tomes and tomes and tomes of other rules, why administration doesn't feel that they meet the need. So if I've got some examples coming forward of other businesses where we're 12-monthly reviewing, that would be useful. Thank you.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. There have been a few in the 3 years that I've been here, specifically a number of public places of public worship in relation to the potential impact of noise on neighbours and the potential impact of car parking. And I'll let the manager respond to the question about this specific application and the reason why we've recommended it apply.
Through you, Mayor Cole, ultimately the concerns from administration and the reasons for refusal when this application was previously before the city related to the scale and intensity of the use and the nature of the use itself. Going through the SAP process, ultimately there's been a tighter management regime to address particular off-site impacts, so around car parking availability, traffic concerns, noise as well. Those were the key themes, and that was the concerns coming back from adjoining tenants. Given that the acceptability of the use to address scale and intensity relies on mitigating those off-site impacts. It's really reliant on those management practices being implemented to a higher standard. And in saying that, I guess it is reliant on the behaviours of the clients as well, in terms of the staggering and coming at those scheduled pick-up and drop-off times, for instance. On that basis, a time-limited approval, that principle has been applied to ensure that the business can be operating in accordance with everything that the applicant is suggesting and set out in the procedure, and I think it's a reasonable approach moving forward. In terms of the timeframes itself for the time-limited approval, I guess that's up for debate, but that's the principle behind it.
Thank you. Through you Mayor, to the Director. Can I just ask the one example that's been given from the last 3 years, which was a place of public worship? Was that given a time-limited approval because of the many concerns raised about it? Mm-hmm.
Yes, through you,
and
Mayor.
if so, how long? What is that time-limited approval for?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. I can't recall the exact time limit, but I do recall that the first time it came to council, it had, was it 5 years? Okay, the Mayor's advising it was 5 years, so there was a time limit. There were other places of public worship in other areas where there were time limits applied as well. Again, I can't recall the exact timeframes. In relation to the management plans, they were required to be reviewed every 12 months. So that was the timeframe issued on those for the public places of public worship that I recall, the two. Yep.
Okay, so overall, administration feels that this is that the 12-monthly reviews are necessary, that we don't have enough other compliance measures in place, and that you feel it's consistent with other approvals.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. In relation to the operational management plan review requirement, yes, the issues are very similar in they relate to noise impacts, parking impacts, and the ability for the management plan to successfully address those is something that needs, in our view, to be reviewed regularly to ensure that if they aren't working, for instance, if the noise is causing a nuisance to the neighbouring properties, that the management practices are reviewed so that they are changed to address that concern. There's no other way of doing that other than having a time frame in which to review those, because once the approval is issued, it's a permanent approval, and if the applicant is complying with all the requirements of that approval, if those requirements aren't adequate to address the noise issues or the traffic issue, the parking issues, there's no ability to review them unless there's a condition that provides that power.
So, councillors, we're back to the substantive. So we're on the amendment, my apologies, we're on the amendment to add the words "and every 12 months thereafter." Are there any further comments in relation to this amendment? Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a question through you to the Director or to the Manager. In the event that there are no complaints and that the use is operating harmoniously, can you describe what a 12-monthly or 6-monthly review might look like in terms of the burden on the applicant or on the city's resources?
Through you, Mayor Cole, ultimately it would involve administration liaising with the applicant, also referring to records of any concerns that were raised in that period of time. Any concerns that were raised would at that time need to be reviewed in terms of validity, and any recommendations stemming from that would need to be included in the review and update of that management procedure. So you'll be liaising with not only with the applicant but informed by any concerns that were raised during that duration.
So 2 questions. One, if everything is harmonious and there's been no complaints, it would simply be an email to say we understand everything is okay, and the city would respond saying that is the case, that's the end of the review. And the second question, is it fair to assume that if there are issues that aren't enough to trigger other elements of the compliance in terms of noise regulations or otherwise, if there are issues of car park usage or otherwise that may be strata issues, it would just be a couple of phone calls, a site visit perhaps, and some emails, that would be the extent of the works that's required? It's not actually a new application or consultants involved or otherwise? You can confirm, please?
Do you, Mayor Cole? In short, yes, it's to that extent.
Okay, so we're on the amendment. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Harley and Councillor Fotakis voting against. I declare it carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments on the substantive motion?
Can I ask a question? And it's
So as the mover, I just wanted to speak, but go ahead, Councillor Topberg.
Excuse me, Councillor Harley. You're the mover, so you would close debate if you speak.
So I'm the mover, so I'm allowed to speak to the substantive, I thought.
Yes, but if you do, you close debate.
No, I don't, because I haven't actually used my mover speaking because I've moved straight into an amendment.
Fair enough.
No, I'll waive it, that's fine, but it's not correct, but that's fine.
Fair enough. Thank you. Councillor Topberg, you may ask a question.
through you to the manager, and it may just, I understand that it may be the way in which these conditions are worded currently, but the current condition 2, this is the time limit approval, cease to operate unless a further approval is sought. Does the word sought need to be changed to granted? Because my reading of that is that as long as there's an application put forth for further approval, that the approval then continues regardless of if and when that application is resolved.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I feel like the first part does cover the granting of the approval for accuracy and to avoid any confusion. I don't think administration will have any objection to changing that to granted.
But if I may, Mayor Cole, just to clarify, that I think that first part of the condition covers the condition because it specifically says the approval is granted for a term of 12 months from the date the use commences. And the second part is really just advice about what would then be required. So I don't think that that second part and the word sought undermines the condition in any way.
Are you satisfied with that response, Councillor Topberg?
No, but I'll leave it for now.
Okay, so we have had several amendments. We are now back at the substantive motion. Councillor Roden, you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to show my support for this application. This has been through a few steps in this process to get here. If you look at the City of Vincent, this location is probably the best location we could probably find, aside from maybe a concrete batching plant that's still in use. So in terms of amenity for the neighbours, I think it's a great location for this, and I think these guys can give it a good red-hot go. We don't have a high per capita of dogs in City of Vincent compared to other local governments, but we do have very passionate dog owners in the city as well. I am a dog owner myself. I probably am not going to drop my dog off when I'm riding on my bike, but I'm sure there are many other people who will. And yeah, I could get a little basket. That would be interesting. But I look forward to seeing how this goes, and I sincerely hope over the next 3 years you can get it up and running and make a real success of it. I think the location, for particularly along the freeway as well, will then open that access up to other people outside of the City of Vincent as well. So I wish you guys the best of luck, assuming that we do approve it. Cheers.
Councillors? Councillor Castle?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'll echo a lot of those comments. I think that I'm satisfied with where we've landed on the conditions in this approval, because I think this is a new type of use in the city. It's something that we have identified as is needed, and I welcome the operation of it in the city. I think that the conditions we've got, though, strike that balance between testing how this new use will impact surrounding businesses and neighbourhood, but I agree, is if you were going to pick a place in Vincent where this would work and have the least amount of impact, this is probably one of them. So I look forward to seeing it back in 3 years for, well, if I'm here, but looking forward to it continuing successfully and hopefully being approved for a longer period of time in 3 years.
Councillors? Councillor Gonaszewski?
Yes, I'm supportive of this application. Look, this is a former warehouse in a mixed-use built form area that's zoned commercial under LPS 2. We don't have a specific planning policy that sets a vision for the area that would limit the type of commercial development that would be appropriate. We've been through consultation. There is a management plan in place. Barking noise assessments have been undertaken. So whilst I can understand that there has been concerns from landowners and tenants in relation to this business. I think that there's been a rigorous approach to the assessment, and there is sufficient conditions in place to minimise the impacts. As I was reading this item, I was listening to one of the puppy dogs on my street barking for most of the day due to building noise in close vicinity. And I think that whilst I can understand that there are concerns around being in proximity to a dog daycare in relation to the noise of barking dogs, I think it's important to note that the overall purpose of these facilities is to reduce stress for dogs and doggy parents in terms of leaving your dog and having them disturb neighbours through separation anxiety and the like. So I hope that the management plan that is in place and the operational procedures works well. I certainly wouldn't be approving this if I felt that there was a realistic chance that I think that we would be seeing validated complaints and concerns raised. I don't think we would be at this point of sending it out into the world. So I do appreciate the comments that Councillor Harley's raised. We do on occasions use time-limited approvals, and they can be around emerging precincts, sort of types of development that we may want to see, but also they are really about just making sure that the operational procedures that are put in place that we at this point in time believe are going to mitigate risks to adjoining neighbours and of the operation in general. We just need to get that confirmation that that is the case when it goes out into the world. So, yes, happy to support this one.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So, look, I want to acknowledge a few things. First of all, the application that was refused previously, that was the reason this went to SAT, was significantly different in my view. The number of dogs was different, but critically one of the issues was that it also involved the use of the common area which sits at the rear of the property, and whilst I'm getting a shake of the head from the applicant there. That certainly is what originally went out to advertising and what piqued some of the concern from some of the adjoining landowners. There are some issues that have come to light. I have been liaising with one of the owners of one of the adjacent properties. There are some issues in relation to the strata and the way in which it was originally set up in terms of the access and use to the rear of the property and the common areas and the car parking as well. I hear Councillor Gontaszewski saying that the primary purpose is to look after the dogs. I think the primary purpose here is to run a business, which it clearly is. We have two existing businesses next door, one of which has significant concerns in relation to noise attenuation, and that I'm satisfied that has been dealt with to the extent that a local government can in an area where the use is permitted. The mix of the acoustic report, the acoustic treatment and management, and also the time-limited approval and the operational limitations that have been placed by amendment so far. I think the extent to which we can deal with it, and if it does prove to be an issue ongoing, there are things available to the city and to that owner in terms of that use. The owner at number 7 and the tenant, which is a food and beverage based use, which is an existing business, and not only that, but quite an iconic business in Western Australia, is something that I think that those concerns are real. If you operate a food and beverage use and within your same lot you are going to be sharing that with a use such as a doggy daycare, I think that does present real issues, and I understand that those concerns, the existence of those concerns, I think for me, and I've given it serious consideration, I don't think that I think that the conditions that are proposed and the management plan and the way in which the owner has accepted, and in particular all the dogs being contained inside the premises, and also the noise management and the waste management practices, the potential impact that was originally of concern to the tenant in particular also mindful that a time-limited approval is not necessarily it's not a test. It's not about saying to somebody, go out and prove it. It's actually an approval that the business is appropriate for the site, and what it does do is provides the city with some ability, because we've proven the other way many occasions that if you don't provide that ability within your planning conditions or within your approval, that you sometimes end up with uses that are incompatible with their surroundings, and you have no ability to be able to make that change going forward. So I will support the application as it has been amended, and I do note again that I think whilst the process has been lengthy and arduous for the applicant, I think that certainly the owners and occupants of 7 and 9 Douglas Street have had legitimate concerns that I trust have been addressed by the conditions.
Thank you so much. Any further comments? Councillor Harley.
Thank you. Obviously support this proposition, and I want to actually say to the applicants, I actually really admire your persistence. I've seen other people come before this council with applications for various kinds, and they walk away from their business ideas. And the applicants have persevered, and I know you've been. They've been very communicative with councillors and with staff during this period of time. And I guess what I want to say is well done for the officers for getting this to us, for making this work as well. It is the first one in the City of Vincent, and I think it's well in keeping with our community. I really hope it succeeds. I hope all the management plans that are in place succeeds, and that the business who will be looking after the pooches keep well and good with their neighbours. I won't be here in 3 years' time to see this application come before you, but I'm more than happy to help on any community campaign you might want to mount to get some community support. So,
Okay, well, without any further ado, I'm going to put the motion. So all those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. They were the items that were raised by members in the public gallery this evening. So we will now move through the remaining items sequentially. So that brings us to item 9.6, which is the Mount Hawthorne Town Centre Place Plan.
Madam Mayor, sorry, I did ask for item 12.5 because there was someone in the gallery who was waiting for 12.5 even though it wasn't addressed. The two gentlemen on the left.
Oh, okay, 12.5. Annual review of delegations. Given that we have a member of the public who's interested in this item, I'm happy to move to that item next. Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. So we'll go to item 12.5, annual review of council delegations. Can I have a mover? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. First of all, I will ask, and this is the interest of the people in the gallery, just to confirm the current practice of the city, and I guess this is a question to the CEO, given that the delegations go to the CEO. The current practice of the city with planning applications is that on request of an applicant who has submitted DA, if they wish for a matter to be heard by council or to be resolved by council, even if the delegation exists and it doesn't trigger it coming to council, that the matter will come before council. Is that something that needs to be enshrined? And if it's not enshrined, is that something, does an applicant have certainty going forward that that is the practice of the city?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that is the practice, and I cannot imagine a scenario where that wouldn't be progressed to council if that was the request by the applicant. There would be no reason not to, so I don't see the need to enshrine something that wouldn't have that approval granted if that's what the applicant requested us.
Thank you. And just
and to confirm, if that was put in writing, then there'd be a formal record of that, and that would enable it to be put onto the council agenda. There's nothing in the delegations that would prevent us doing that either.
By virtue of the question and the recording, it's there anyway now. So, but I just will also ask, in terms of process, obviously if someone requests at the time of submitting an application, but do we... Because my guess is if something is able to be determined under delegation and the result is to be to the applicant's liking, including the conditions, then they will obviously have that preference rather than waiting for the meeting cycle. At what point do we inform an applicant before we issue a decision of the intended decision and the conditions, and therefore they can make that request for it to come to council? So at what point is the trigger for a DA to come to council at the applicant's request?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. Under a scenario where the city was going to refuse an application, we consult with the applicant first to discuss the reasons for that refusal, allow them an opportunity to address those issues before we make a determination. At that point, the applicant has the option of, we enter into a discussion about the decision-making process, the delegations, and the applicant is given the opportunity to request it go to council if they consider that they've addressed the issues and that they don't need to do anything else, and they still think that an approval is warranted. Then that's when they have the opportunity, and that's at the very end of the process, after consultation, after they've been given an opportunity to make changes. Typically what happens at that point is applicants look to make the changes, look to make further changes, and we ultimately, most of the time, we end up at a point where we have an application that is supportable.
And just for further clarity, does that include conditions? So if, for example, under delegation, if it was possible, the city was of a mind to approve, let's say, a doggy daycare, but was to look to impose a condition of a time limit of approval of, say, 12 months, would the applicant have the opportunity between, are they just informed we're looking to approve, or would they get a copy of conditions prior so they could make a choice, or is it the easiest process that they would accept that approval and then make an application for a variation of the condition to be determined by council?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we have the same conversation with applicants about major conditions. I can't say we provide them with all the conditions, but when there's a major condition such as a 12-month approval or a review of a management plan every 12 months, we'll absolutely email that to them, discuss that with them in the same way as we would discuss concerns we have that would warrant a refusal.
Thank you. And I have a further question on this item to the CEO. So on page 1109 of the agenda, this is delegations in relation to variation of a tender. So item 12, the authority to, and it says vary a contract that has been entered into with a successful tenderer provided the variations do not change the scope of the original contract or increase the contract value beyond 10%. Well, first of all, is there a concern that it's only if it is increased as opposed to varying the contract? So if it was a decrease by a similar value or otherwise, is that something that the intent is that just gets picked up in a budget review process, or is it, I guess the trigger for the increase is obvious because it would need to, in any event, I assume, come back to council. Actually, I'll ask it in a different way. The variation of a contract by that amount would normally, because of the minimum amounts that go to tender, would normally trigger having to come to council for the approval of the expenditure in any event. So should the delegation read varying the contract rather than increasing the contract value?
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify, should it be a variation to increase or decrease by 10%? Through you, Mayor Cole, I think the issue, if there was going to be an issue on the budget limit, then that would only apply when it was increased. It'd be perfectly, there'd be no objection and be a benefit to council if we were able to secure and finalise a contract with a lower price. I can't see the benefit of having that as less than, as opposed to an increase by 10%.
So, for example, if a geothermal bore was to be tendered for, and the requirement was for X volume of geothermal energy to be coming, so the bore size was to be whatever it may be, and the winning tenderer submitted and proposed something that was in increase to that and was awarded the tender. So if the scope is X, they present Y and they're awarded it. does that mean that if they then vary the scope of the contract because they go back to what was in the original tender, so it doesn't I guess I'm just looking for circumstances where the result that we get, or potentially the result that we get as a council and community, differs from what was awarded in the tender, but the scope of the tender itself called for a lesser result. Does that make sense?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. In practice, as you go through these processes, you get to know the supplier. There's always the opportunity and the potential to be able to extract different levels of services or high levels of functionality. There may be some add-ons to whatever's being procured, which would be a benefit to us, which may not impact on the cost or the total cost or the approved cost in the tender process. And we always need that flexibility because there's some finalisation of that contract where we would try to secure the absolute best terms and conditions to the benefit, not to the detriment of the city. I can't see a downside in the scenario
So
proposing.
I guess
Sorry.
if in that example, so if the tender scope asks for 1, and the winning tenderer says they can deliver 1.5, and they are awarded the tender on that basis, if they this delegation allows them to turn around at some point and say, in reality we can only deliver 1.2, but because the original scope of the tender was for 1, we're still above what that was, but ultimately the community is not getting the result that it thought it was getting when it awarded the tender. I'm just concerned that that then sits as a delegated, potentially under delegation rather than a matter that would come back to council, even though it would be a significant variation in the result and may well have influenced why the tender was awarded, because it is not the original scope of the tender.
Through you, Mayor Cole. In practice, we end up finessing some of the terms and conditions in the contract after what is a more high-level assessment of the key criteria in the scope. So you do learn more during that tender process about potential of a service or a piece of equipment, and we would want to maintain that flexibility to be able to put in as many benefits into the final contract in the positive, certainly not in the negative. And so just to clarify, is it more about the terms and conditions or the scope, or about the cost differential?
I guess the cost differential becomes the trigger by the cost differential being increased, and the scope of the original tender become the triggers for delegation rather than the outcome itself. And I can draw, so for example, the works done at Beatty Park, the last lot of works that were done, the plans that were approved by council had a significant, I would say, architectural consideration for the screening devices that were on the exterior of the gym. That was what was approved by council, and at some point through the process we were informed that effectively, no, they were just pretty pictures. That's not what was actually going to be put in practice. That was something that council dealt with in its own way. This, I guess, as a principle, because it's that we won't see those sorts of outcomes as a result of that being delegated to the CEO, and all of a sudden we get outcomes that, because they're not more expensive or outside of the original scope, that the outcomes of tenders that are awarded are not necessarily lesser than what was expected, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense, and it's essentially we can be as specific as possible in the tender specifications about quality and materials and deliverability. It's the visual impression of what might be on the front of the brochure may look different when it's put on a building or amended to the windows. So that'd be impossible to predict in advance. That does essentially fall to the judgment of the professionals dealing with the contractor at the time to make sure we're as close to scope as possible, but also always try to maximise the quality and value for money that we're getting from the supplier.
Thank you.
Councillors, we're discussing the delegations item. Councillor Gonchevsky was seconder.
I just have a question in relation to the deletion of the delegation. Condition 11 of Delegation 17.1 under the planning scheme. 1191 of 1256. So it's proposed to delete the condition that basically says that the delegation does not extend to applications for development approval that propose more than 3 grouped or multiple dwellings or age or dependent persons dwellings. And I just wanted to get some commentary in relation to so unless these sorts of applications breach one of the other conditions or have more than 5 objections, we wouldn't be seeing them. And I just wanted to get some commentary in relation to how many of these applications propose a variance on parking. This off the top of your head, I guess I can't inflect up. I'm just going to ask that question, and whether some words that whether there are any words that could be put in to potentially try and identify those sorts of applications that do propose a variance on parking and seek to exclude them from, seek to include them in what would come before council.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I'm sorry, I couldn't comment on the proportion of those types of applications above 3 multiple or group dwelling applications that have a variation to parking, for lack of a better word, or that don't meet the deemed to comply standard or the acceptable outcome. There is the ability to develop a condition that of the delegation that stated that those types of applications where they don't meet the deemed to comply standard or acceptable outcome in relation to parking would need to come to council. There is the ability to do that. It would be relatively straightforward, if that helps. Hope that answers the question.
I'll just speak. I think probably I was actually just looking back to 2016 in terms of some of the other approvals that we had done where we had issued time-limited approvals, and it really struck me as to I know we had a lot of catching up to do and we're more on top of things now, but we used to see a lot of planning applications and we don't see quite as many now. I know that the economy is possibly responsible for a fair whack of that too, but I guess I am also very conscious of development that ultimately ends up being impactful on surrounding residents, perhaps not meeting that more than 5. Ultimately, a lot of the time I think that we have people that maybe they're not, in contact with their neighbours or they're busy, etc. And so whilst they may lodge their objection, they aren't necessarily able to, chat to their neighbours and share their concerns and encourage them to submit objections. So I think that, and so having things come before council can really allow for that additional opportunity for people to come forward and have their say in a public space, and also, we often do see that the community can galvanise over things when something does come before council that they may not have had the opportunity to do through consultation. So I'm overall very supportive of the changes to delegations. I should also note that since 2016 we have also got a more robust approach to our planning policy, which probably also through the hard work of those seated at the table. And so I think there's a number of factors why we're not seeing them, but I am probably a little bit concerned that, we might see a few without visitors bays slide through, and I do bang on about that quite a bit. So I will possibly start to write some words if anyone else has any comments that they would like to make on this.
I'm happy to fill the gap unless anyone else wishes to speak. Look, I think in the notes that we've got from our briefing meeting, Council's currently dealing with 11% of development applications. I wouldn't really like to go lower than 11%. I think that it is useful for council to see development applications so that we're not just setting policy but we're actually involved in some level of statutory planning. Obviously there's those members on the DAP that get to keep across things, but for all council members I think it's useful to see how our policy is being applied by administration, and I think it's a valuable way to check in on matters. And previously we have had applications where we've seen things like the five-a-side front setback rules start to slip in established areas that are not transitioning, and I think it's useful. In terms of the delegations before us, I had some concerns about the removal of the need for grouped and multiple dwellings, proposing more than 3 dwellings to be referred to council for determination in every instance, because I think that those sorts of dwellings are usually the ones that do cause concerns. And to be honest, I think that the development industry in that sort of medium scale development is where we see a lot of problems. I think Design WA has now come in and that's informing the larger scale developments, but at this sort of medium density is where we sometimes see some not great outcomes, and that's not a reflection on our staff. I think that's just a reflection of where the industry is at. And I think sometimes there's a lot of negotiation that happens between officers and applicants, and sometimes council having fresh eyes to review that, and community having the opportunity to engage in the process, which is a different level of engagement altogether, as Councillor Gonchevsky is referring to. It's an opportunity to come to a public meeting, to have a say at the microphone if you wish, and to allow a more public airing of that debate around the pros and cons of that development. So I wouldn't mind discussion on that, because I think that for me that's just taking it a little bit too far, and I'm relatively comfortable with what we're saying at council at the moment. I think educational establishment, there's no real reason why that can't go forward. The issue about billboards being refused under delegated authority, I think that given that we've had the answer that applicants can request for applications to come to council, that where it's highly contentious, then that's can sort of deal with that. But I think that where it comes to grouped and multiple dwellings, I'm certainly still interested in seeing those medium density ones come through to council. Did that fill the gap?
I think, if you have any suggested wording.
So, Councillor Gonchevsky, are you moving an amendment? Can I just have confirmation that you're moving that amendment? You are? Okay, is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded, Councillor Loden. Councillor Gonchevsky, do you wish to speak to the amendment? No? Councillor Loden, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
That's fine.
Councillors, any comments on the amendment or questions? Okay, I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Is there any further discussion on the substantive motion? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Okay, I'll now go sequentially through the remaining items on the agenda. So that takes us back to item 9.6, Mount Hawthorne Town Centre Place Plan. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Loden.
Through you, Mayor Cole, look, I'm very happy to support this particular item. I can note that this town centre place plan is the result of working very closely with the town team, the Mount Hawthorne Hub, and during my time on the Hub before on council, I can verify that there was a lot of consultation conducted by the Hub and in the development of their action plan in 2017, and a lot of those actions have been reflected on our town centre place plan. So that's really good to see. It's particularly happy to see that we're continuing, or that we're placing emphasis on the continuation of the work on Axford Park. I think this has the potential to become quite iconic in the Mount Hawthorne Town Centre. I think other important actions in that place plan are around addressing night trading in Mount Hawthorne. It's been a concern and an issue for some time. There's probably not an easy answer to that, but I think it's definitely something that we should be looking at and working on. And of course, I'm especially happy to see an action around a future youth space in Mount Hawthorne. We've been crying out for this for a long time, both from that local community, and it's been borne out in the results of our public open space strategy. So I'm very happy to see that both reflected on this place plan and in potential budget items and an item to come in the future. So look forward to this being delivered.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also happy to support the place plan. I did have some questions around day trade and inclusion of sustainability measures within that, and spend a bit of time talking with the administration about how that could be incorporated. Ironically, that actually comes up under the next agenda item, so I'll talk to my proposed amendments at that point in time. I do think that supporting day trade, whilst not currently an issue within the Mount Hawthorne area, there has been a number of closures. They've fortunately been replaced by new organisations, but if those businesses had not been replacing the ones that had left, we would find ourselves in a slightly awkward position in Mount Hawthorne as well, and I think it's important that we keep a front foot on these things as well. But I'll talk further to that later, but overall I'm happy to support the place plan. Thank you.
Councillors, any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Thank you. We're on to item 9.7, Place Plan Minor Annual Review. Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't think I was going to be talking that quickly after I last spoke. I'm happy to support the North Perth Place Plan and the overall Volume 1 Place Plan. I do have an amendment which I'll talk to separately, but I'll give others an opportunity to speak first.
I'll just go to the seconder. Are you happy for the amendment to be moved, seconder? Or do you wish to speak to the substantive?
I'll just speak to the substantive because I did have a brief email conversation with Councillor Loden today. It may inform slightly his the wording of his amendment. So actually, no, I'll let him move the amendment because otherwise I'm speaking to an amendment that doesn't exist.
Are you seconding the amendment? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Loden.
Okay, so I've moved it now and I can speak to the item, is that correct? Yes. Okay, thank you. So the amendment was to include as part of the Vincent Town Centre Place Plan a consideration under item 1.12, the opportunity for office sites to support day trade activities and consideration of new renewable energy opportunities to be included as a part of that overall action. So it currently speaks to a variety of purposes: affordable housing, parking improvements, enhanced town centre connections. I see something like office sites as a really key opportunity for supporting day trade within our town centres. It's not obviously an easy thing to do, but if those opportunities do exist, there's a great way to bring people into the town centres that would not otherwise be there, and I guess effectively grows the pie of people who can then engage with our town centres. We have a new sustainable environment strategy and a climate emergency declaration, which Councillor Toppelberg will attest to, I'm sure. And so I think it's important that we also include those considerations of renewable energy opportunities into into the work we're doing. We are looking at assumably our parking areas, which is city-owned land, as well as other buildings. One example of this would be to include solar panels as shading over our parking areas, or if we are redeveloping it, making sure that those renewable energy opportunities are assessed at that time as well. Thank you.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. So a couple of things. First of all, I think the addition of the words or the consideration of renewable energy opportunities, I think in light of the emergency as we are experiencing, but also in looking at our strategic community plan, I get a sense that strong sense from our community administration and council that those opportunities are being looked at in everything that we do, and I question the necessity in general to be adding them at the end of things such as this. But I guess, and that the way that the actual clause is worded, I think that the intent of it is a little bit lost because it only talks about the acquisition of land. So in the event that this amendment is not successful, and I apologise to Councillor Loden because I did say I talked to him about it earlier, but we didn't quite get there, because if you look at it, it talks about the city should have a plan for the future and current and future land holdings, but this is talking about the strategy only to explore strategic acquisition. So in the event that this amendment was not successful, a potential other amendment could say the city should plan for the future of its current and future land holdings. A strategy could be developed to explore the use of its current land holdings and strategic acquisition of land, and the rest of the sentence. And were I the mover, I probably wouldn't include the words consideration of renewable energy opportunities, because, as I say, I assume that's now part of our DNA and what we look at in everything that we do. So I'm concerned that effectively this sends a message that we're looking to buy sites to build offices, which is not exactly what we're doing. The likelihood is, particularly in the North Perth Town Centre, that any real action would be on land that we currently hold, not actually looking at acquiring sites to do so. And because of the way the condition that it's currently worded, I think that misses that opportunity or that point a little bit.
Can I just ask you a question? Are you saying that the amendment should be a standalone clause within the place plan?
I'm saying that if the amendment is not successful, I think the same intent can be a subsequent amendment, just changing. I can't amend an amendment, so where a strategy could be developed to explore the use of existing land holdings and strategic acquisition, and then continue to read, because otherwise it's saying that effectively the exploration of those things and future office use is only on land that we would acquire, not the land that we currently hold.
Okay. Do you wish to respond to that mover of the amendment? I think the point...
I'm struggling to understand the wording.
Can I just perhaps outline what I think is happening here? I think what Councillor Toppelberg is saying is that your amendment is effectively bolted onto something which is talking about a strategy to develop a strategic acquisition of land, and that is the issue, and that this has been bolted onto something which is about a strategy for land acquisition. Can I perhaps get some clarification from the staff whether they see it that way, and whether a standalone provision dealing with seeking opportunities for office sites to support day trade activities and consideration of renewable energy opportunities may be better placed as a standalone action under the plan, rather than attached to something which appears to be dealing with strategic land acquisition?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I guess it would be up to Council if you want to link the two parts of the action. If it's really wanting to look at those types of opportunities to support day trade, and it's done, and we're wanting to do it in such a way that it's the city acquiring land for that purpose, then it would need to be linked. If it is wanted to be a completely separate initiative where the city looked at additional opportunities for non-city owned sites to support day trade activities or renewable energy opportunities, then it would need to be a standalone action.
So if I just go to the mover of the amendment and ask the mover, were you intending for this to be that the city would use its strategic acquisition of land to purchase office sites to support day trade and consider renewable energy opportunities, or was this a more general provision about office uses being in the private realm being used in this way?
The latter. So my read, I guess, was that this was looking at how it's looking at all our land holdings, and when we are looking at all our land holdings, we should be considering this. as well. Yes, does that make sense?
Okay, so I think we might need to just deal with this amendment and then perhaps have a second amendment that might come forward. So on the basis that this seems to be muddying two different very specific issues, I won't be supporting this amendment, but I would welcome a second amendment coming forward to deal with opportunities for office sites to support to explore opportunities for office sites in the private realm to support day trade activities and consideration of renewable energy opportunities as a separate action. So, yep, okay, so I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Okay, thank you. That's lost. Would you wish to move a second amendment? Thank you, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take administration's advice on where would be best placed to put that amendment.
Can I ask? Yeah.
Do we want it under? Would it best fit under item 1.12, or does it need to be in item 1.13?
Can I just ask a question through you, Madam Mayor? Would the intent of the discussion not be fulfilled if after the words "could be developed to explore" to put the words "the use of current land holdings and"?
I guess so, but you're talking about things like parking improvements and enhanced town centre connections, which to me talks more to acquiring land to provide those things. Yes, but that's because it's city-held land owning, so that's because it's held by the city, and I think this is about, that's quite specific, whereas what I think Councillor Loden's talking about is just encouraging private land holdings that are existing offices. No? Oh, okay, I give up. I officially give up.
I would assume that we're already trying to encourage office spaces already as part of what we're doing. So when we're looking at the land that we have, so our parking spaces, our buildings that we have, looking to see if there's opportunities to create office spaces in there as say if we have a commercial building and we're looking to get rid of that building for some reason, say, that we would actively encourage that to become an office space in some mechanism to support those day trade type activities. Also, similarly, making sure that those considerations of renewable energy are part of that as well. So my intent there was when we're looking at City of Vincent owned land, so I think Councillor Gontaszewski is correct, it's an additional bullet point effectively under item 1.12. And sorry for taking so long to get my thought process clear.
Okay, do you have a form of words to put forward? Any advice from administration is very welcome at this juncture. I'd really like to move on.
Sure. If I could make a suggestion through you, Mayor Cole, I think that the wording that you had that was proposed in the amendment was really focusing on the city's owned land and the use of that land. I guess in terms of that strategy, so it's an action that won't be commenced until 2020-21, and it's really looking at the city's land that we own or strategic acquisition or how we can best manage or, and if that involves the sale of land or disposal of land as well for the, I guess, most benefit to the city. I think at the time that project is undertaken, we would thoroughly scope it in consultation with council members to identify any other intentions that we would be seeking to achieve from such a strategy. So I think if you wanted to include the wording at this point in time, then the wording that was proposed in the amendment would achieve that, with, of course, the option or the intent to refine that in the future in consultation with council members.
Okay, how about, as a suggestion, how about we go back to the original amendment with the addition of the words, a strategy could be developed to explore the strategic acquisition of land or city land holdings for a variety of purposes. So it's just adding after land and adding or city-owned land. So it's not just about buying land, it's about using land that we already have. Would that satisfy? Okay. So the amendment is as was written, except to insert the words Tash after develop to explore the strategic acquisition of land.
It's on the screen.
Yep, okay. Does that deal with it? Okay. That's moved by Councillor Loden, seconded by Councillor Castle. Is there any discussion?
Yes.
Councillor Harley?
It doesn't. My view is it doesn't make sense because the city-owned land has already been acquired. So why would you include it in a strategic acquisition? I think we're trying. I think in trying to add things in, we actually I feel like we're limiting. And I think what all that is needed here is something. It's just 1.12 is that a strategy could be developed to explore the strategic acquisition of a land for a variety of purposes, which could include, and if we simply said but not limited to, I think leaves our field wide open. I'm a bit confused about how the city would strategically acquire land that we already own. So I'm not sure I understand the purpose of the amendment in this document. I mean, this is this is, I just don't think it fits well within this document.
Councillor Loden, you should just speak to the amendment.
Thank you, Mayor. So my read of this now is the city does not have a strategy outlining how its land holdings in the town centre could be used, is the problem identified. And the city should plan for the future for its current and future land holdings. So that means what are we going to do with the stuff that we currently have, the buildings, the car parks, and then what do we also need in addition to that? Assumably also what do we no longer need as part of that? So then it says a strategy should be developed to explore the strategic acquisition of land, and then with the amendment should be developed to explore the use of current land holdings that we already have, and strategic acquisition of land, which is the process we're going to be going through over the coming years, or city-owned land. Oh yeah, I don't need all that. No, I don't need that second one. Yeah, just get rid of that last one for a variety of purposes.
We have moved and seconded this, and we're debating it, but the CEO has also suggested, which would probably have to be a third attempt, that you could say the city should plan for the future of its current and future land holdings. A strategy could be developed to explore the use of land for a variety of purposes, blah, blah, blah. But I think that just ends up I think that what we've got on the table is just a longer format of what that says, and I don't think that it's technically a problem. Yes, Councillor
I
Castle.
don't think what's on the screen is what we moved and seconded. I think we moved to explore the strategic acquisition of land or city-owned land without the use of current land holdings. I think that was a previous discussion, and I don't think that's what we're...
I've got a move in a second. I've got Dan Loden and seconded Councillor Gonchevsky. Oh my God. Could you please provide the wording of the current amendment on the screen? I think it's similar. It's just that we talked about having use of current land holdings after strategic acquisition.
I actually don't have an objection.
I don't think it changes the intent.
Yeah, I don't object to what was there, but we don't need both of those phrases, one or the other, and we just need to be clear what we're voting on.
Oh no, I see what you mean. So The wording, use of current land holdings, was not put by the mover and seconder of this amendment. The only wording that was added was or city-owned land. So can you please delete that? Thank you, Councillor Castle. Okay, I think this does what the mover is intending. It could be cleaned up, but it's going to have the same effect. So my advice would be to proceed with this amendment. Does anyone who hasn't spoken to about this amendment wish to talk to it? Okay, I'm putting it. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Harley voting against. We're back to the substantive. Councillor Gondaszewski.
I accept Councillor Harley's commentary in relation to this now not making sense. I would like to propose, I'm so sorry, I would like to propose an amendment that after the word that is currently underlined, the or, preceding city-owned land, strategy could be developed to explore the strategy, or insert the words use of, and then it all makes sense. No. So, yeah, we're just, yep. It's not like there's a lot else to talk about.
Seconded by Councillor Castle. This does might make more sense. Is there any discussion? Okay, I'm putting it. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Harley voting against. We're back to the substantive. Is there any further comments on the substantive motion? Councillor Gondaszewski.
This is a good idea. I like this. I think it's good that it's here. I think that we should talk about sustainability everywhere we can. And so I'm supportive of this, and I will also probably be putting forward similar wording for an economic development strategy in relation to our land holdings. So I'm sorry if it's going to be repetitive, but I think it's important. So,
bravo. Any further comments? Councillor Fotakis.
I just want to say thanks to the staff for all the efforts that go into these plans. Sorry. And the amendments. I also want to say I'm happy to see one of my photographs feature on page 10 of Volume 1. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments on the place plans? Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, great effort by the city. I'm interested, just a quick question to the CEO, sorry I should have asked last week, but just with all these plans, do you think it's realistic, the implementation of it? Are you confident that the city's going to be able to implement it, given all the time frames?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we're confident we can deliver what has been budgeted for in the draft budget up for adoption tonight, and then we're doing 1 year at a time, Mayor Cole.
All right. We're going to move on. We've still got a lot of items to get through, so I'm putting this motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. That means that we will move on to infrastructure and environment. Item 10.1, Waste Strategy Project 2, Bulk Hard Waste Junk Service Options Appraisal. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Let me get to it. I understand that there is the alternative on the light green, should this not be successful. I think that the principles of what we're discussing and have been discussing, I think we are in agreement. For me, I think whilst it is always an option, the idea that we will continue exactly as we are is in reality not an option. I think at the very, very least, the way in which we manage the collection times and the way in which we deal with some of the issues that we have on people's verges could be better managed. So whilst the option of continuing as we are in terms of presents as reasonable in terms of providing an annual collection at a certain time and allowing people to put stuff on their verge, pretty much most people we see a full 2 weeks of stuff out the front of people's homes, and that is the genesis of a lot of the concern in the community. The waste management and recovery issues aside, and I'll deal with that should the alternative get up, because as is currently recommended, I won't be supporting the officer recommendation. But those practices aside, I think that we can do far better in terms, certainly if we're going out to tender. The demands that we can make, I think, are reasonable in this day and age. This is one of those things that we've done for the last 10 years, probably because it's the way it had always been done. And we are small and relatively agile in terms of the geographic area. The idea that while we're divided into two areas only, and while we provide that 2-week time window, I think we can, in the current economic climate, I'm sure if we were more demanding on pick-up services that we would see a better result. So I will wait to hear the debate, but I will support an alternative because I think it is important that we be clear about the process with the community and have that conversation as we go. And I also am a bit concerned about the idea that we would potentially have no service until, at the very earliest, winter of 2020. And given the time of year, it's quite possible that would be deferred to later in the year. So I'll listen to the debate.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Councillor Toppelberg that we need change, and that is a path that we're going down. Ultimately, this is a project listed in our waste strategy. We need to improve the diversion rate from our current bulk rubbish service. And we have seen increasing complaints raised with the councillors and from the community regarding the presentation of bulk waste on the verge. However, I'm also conscious that the bulk rubbish approach that we do currently take and the associated curbside foraging that goes along with it does support reuse of many items that may otherwise end up in landfill, and that many people in our community would like to retain an element of this approach. And I'm not sure that at present there is, I don't really see at this point in time that community voice, recognising that this is what is on the table before us is pre-consultation. I think I'll be upfront that on the balance of the options presented, at this point I'd probably be supportive of a transition to an on-request non-containerised service with expansion of additional user pays options for on-demand items such as mattresses, white goods and furniture. But I do wonder within that new world what would happen to the verge fines and what the city could do to facilitate reuse rather than recycling so that we can move up on the waste hierarchy. And I think the options presented are largely silent on this. And so I would have liked to have seen the draft survey, or had an opportunity to have input into the draft survey around proposed consultation strategy, and to ensure that it would be able to gather community sentiment and ideas regarding this. And I'm also not in favour of missing a year of service. So I think that I'm very appreciative of the work we've had presented to us, and I think it forms a strong foundation for us to go forward in discussions with the community. I want that discussion to be informed and nuanced. I think there is a tension between this idea of how we might support our community to have access to other people's unwanted goods, and at the same time not have verges strewn with rubbish for weeks on end around the city, and the concerns that raises. So I will consider an alternative and support one if it came forward, as I just think that this is possibly at this point in time, particularly missing a year of service, is not something that I can support.
Councillors, any comments? Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Gonchevsky. I think that it's many people are very passionate about it in the community, and I think that we need to be careful in the way, or be thoughtful in the way that we consult on this. So I would be supportive of the alternative that were to come to pass.
Councillors? Given that you never know whether an alternate will see the light of day, you have to speak on the motion before you. So I just briefly wanted to say that I do think that this is an issue which oddly has got deeper sentiment than the rollout of a third bin with FOGO, which is much, much higher diversion. We're talking about 50% diversion through FOGO versus 1% roughly with bulk waste. But for, for various reasons, there is a sentimentality around the Verge bulk waste collection, and I have spoken to other local government areas about the sorts of issues that they've confronted when they've gone through this. And my view is that when you're dealing with an issue with a lot of community sentiment and where there's very, very different views, some who absolutely love it and some who hate it, that it's really important that when you do go out to community that really you've got one chance to get it right in terms of that upfront development of the community consultation and engagement, for me, should happen before we have selected an option, because that's the way in which we communicate the how, the why, the rationale, and to think through some more thoughtful options that might suit our community. I'm keen to see the use of the community engagement panel. They're there, and I think this is a sort of issue that would be a really great one for them to engage in and to provide better informed options going out to the community. So look, I do also want to acknowledge that there has been a change in the report from the briefing, and that it has included the ability to continue the service, and it has given more information about what was planned in terms of use of market force, etc. But my preference would be that we do that another way, and that we do that development of the community engagement up front, and that we're very clear when we go out to our community about the why, and to have some pretty nuanced options going out to them. Because I think if you lose the ability to engage on it and to get that first step right, then effectively, you might lose the argument for change. And we do have that bigger project underway of FOGO, where there's a lot at stake in terms of actual diversion from landfill. So I don't support the officer recommendation as put, but I do appreciate the background work that has been going on in terms of looking at the options and doing the analysis and the expertise behind that, and I would like to just be clear about that. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the officer recommendation. All those in favour? All those against? I declare it lost with the unanimous against. Before consideration of if there is consideration of the alternate motion on the green, I'd just like to say that it was not put forward by me with clause 4.4, and that I wouldn't have that. I should have sought for that to be deleted, because that is that doesn't really work with 4.2, which states that the detailed public engagement and communication strategy includes actions, rationale, and is presented to council with the refined options prior to community consultation. So 4.4, it was not in my intent for that to appear on the alternate motion. Yeah, well, that would be my preference. So I'm just wondering if there's a mover or seconder. Moved Councillor Harley, seconded Councillor Castle. Councillor Harley, do you wish to speak to it? So this is moved without, just up to 4.3. Yep. Councillor Castle, do you wish to speak to it? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I've got a few amendments I'd like to propose. So first is clause 3.1. So I would propose to amend it to read, so current says maintenance of current annual service, so that would be changed to say maintenance of an annual service, and then with inclusion of meaningful ways to achieve higher diversion. So getting rid of consideration and getting rid of the current annual service. So it's effectively saying that, well, I'll move it, and if I get a second I'll speak to it, but maintenance of an annual service with inclusion of meaningful ways to achieve higher diversion.
Is there a seconder? Seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. As I said when we were speaking to the original item, I don't think maintenance of the current service is in line with expectation from community. I think even if we do still go and pick stuff up from people's verges, that we can do better. And but yeah, this basically demands it, rather than saying to people that one of the options is just to continue as we are.
Yeah, I think the second part of the sentence actually means that it wouldn't be current anyway, so I'm happy to support this, as I think it provides greater clarity.
Any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive.
Got one more, if I may, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
So in line with that, so 4.3 would be amended to say that procurement, and then delete the words for the continuation of the existing and include of a bulk hard waste service. So that would effectively say that we're not going to be continuing with the same service. So even if we went to the same contractor, they would need to be understanding that it can't continue as it is. So the words would be that procurement. It'll actually be the procurement of a bulk hard waste service for February 2020 be undertaken. Or that, no, I suppose that, the word that can stay, apologies. So that procurement of a bulk hard waste service for February or in February 2020 be undertaken.
Is there a mover? A seconder, rather? Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Do you wish to speak to it? Anyone? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare the amendment carried. We're back to the substantive.
So I will just speak to it briefly. I think for me the key element that's missing in the medium term, and I'm happy to go through with the consultation, but I think that we need to ensure that we're very clear about and that we know, and I know that there are people who say they passionately love the collection on verges. I think that if we were to ask people who love their trash and treasure finds how much treasure they find among the trash these days, it is vastly different to what used to be there. And for me, the key element is actually the safety issue, and it's the issue mostly what, certainly in my experience, aside from the issue of rubbish and just junk being strewn down the street, most of what I see people seeking are effectively professional curb surfers who are looking for things like copper wiring, etc. And the days of seeing particularly furniture of any quality being left on a verge, whilst, as I say, there's always going to be some treasure amongst the trash, it's few and far between these days, and I think that we need to manage what we're looking for and also meaningfully manage, and I understand Clause 3.3 attempts to deal with it in terms of particular events, but I think more generally we need to be able to provide opportunities for recycling within the community of bulky items.
Councillors? Yes, I've already said what I wanted to say, so I'm not going to add any more to the substantive, but I just want to check that the substantive motion that we're, as amended, no longer has clause 4.4 because it was still hanging around on the screen before. Okay, it's gone. But it has not been deleted through amendment. It was not put, so it should not appear as deleted. Okay, so just to clarify, it does not appear in the minutes because it was not put.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Cole, it was never part of the substantive?
No, it was never part of the substantive. It was put without clause 4.4. Okay. Is there any further debate? All right, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Next item is 10.3 North Perth Precinct Traffic Study. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I note there's two amendments, one from Councillor Howard who's not here, or actually it's not an amendment, alternative recommendation. I guess I'll talk to my amendment once I've given others an opportunity to speak, but at this point in time I don't support the officer recommendation. I don't feel like we've addressed the issues that were identified in the original petition that was submitted. The original petition requested that council engages with residents to develop the proposed measures. Whilst there was preliminary engagement with residents in 2018, there hasn't been further engagement in relation to the report that was put together and that was presented to the Urban Mobility Advisory Group, and our community engagement policy is currently being reviewed. be timely to use some community engagement strategies for this piece of work, and this would ensure that both the assessment of the problem and the development of solution involving community would involve community participation. Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Ditto. Yes, I agree. I think that the traffic studies that have been done and the consultants' work has been very helpful, and I think it is getting us closer to coming up with a solution for these issues. But there's a necessary step missing in this, which is taking those particular proposals back to the petitioners and to the community to actually consult with them in a meaningful way, so that those... I'm sorry too. So that those solutions aren't just presented as a done deal. So I won't be supporting the proposition, the item as written. I would support the alternate recommendation on the lemon.
Councillors, does anyone wish to speak to this item? Okay, I'm going to put it all those in. No, you do wish to speak? No, okay, can I just... Councillor Murphy, do you wish to speak? Because Councillor Loden, unless you're just asking a question, we'll close debate. Oh, you haven't... Okay, all right. Okay, well, I'll just go to Councillor Murphy first.
Well, I was going to move the Lemon amendment.
So the Lemon is an alternate motion?
Oh, it's an alternate. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
That's
yeah,
okay.
yeah, right.
I'll go
right,
to
right.
Councillor Loden with his orange amendment.
I'll move the amendment on the orange, requesting that administration as part of the integrated transport plan gives consideration to creating precincts that restricts through traffic and supports traffic flow along main roads to create more pedestrian and bike-friendly environments.
Is there a seconder for this item? Seconded Councillor Castle. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Loden?
I'll be very quick because I'll have to move it again probably shortly. I feel like the integrated transport plan is a good place for this, the broader context of what has been requested by the residents to be considered, but I don't think it should only really be considered in this specific precinct but across the whole of the city. You have two approaches to how you manage traffic flow. One is to sort of basically create a box around development and encourage traffic flow around the outside, which is commonly what you see in large-scale developments. The other option is effectively how it works within the city of Vincent, where it's free-flowing. I haven't seen us conclusively investigate those options, and I think the integrated transport plan is a good place to do that consideration, see what that would actually entail and if that will actually support the objectives of what we're trying to achieve through there, creating more pedestrian and bike-friendly environments in our community, which would also probably be coupled with potential reduced speeds in our back streets as well. Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Yeah, I support this this amendment. I think that while it might not have been the intent in the original petition, this has the potential to be a bit of a pilot project in how we approach the precincts, and I think it's important that we enshrine that in our broader plans that we're developing.
Councillors, Councillor Gonchevsky.
I haven't decided yet, but I do have concerns about putting an amendment that relates to the SITP to this particular item, because it sort of extends the life of this particular item beyond what I think it reasonably would need to be. I am very supportive of the idea. And I suppose, given that I've just already banged on about being repetitive, it's probably of no harm. So I think I've just talked myself into supporting it. That said, I think you'll be putting it again. So.
Councillors, I personally have some reservations because I'm worried that we're going to be creating mazes through our neighbourhoods, and I think that brings with it its own frustrations, huge amounts of asphalt, huge amounts of intervention. Personally, I'm really trying to pin my hopes on the 40-kilometre trial. So if this does come forward again, I would prefer wording that said examines the benefits or pros and cons, because I think that it's not straightforward, and I look at some of the early interventions where the city has done cul-de-sacs and blocked roads, and I'm just not I'd need some convincing, and I would like the city to not give consideration just to this as in a positive, but actually to examine the pros and cons, because I think we'll see both sides, and I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to be good. So I won't support it as is, and if it comes forward again, I reckon alternative wording would probably be better. And you could also consider listing it for discussion at UMAG for consideration of inclusion in the ITP, rather than attaching it to an item which is very specifically about roadworks in an area. Just my thoughts. Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for the record, I echo those comments almost completely. I feel that it's been tacked on to a very specific motion here, which was a very specific or identified set of problems, and actually what we're being asked to support is a whole of city approach. We're asking administration to consider this. I live just very few metres away from a whole range of interventions in regards to the Mount Lawley area. I know people that live in those areas who actually would prefer their street be more free-flowing because they feel it's actually kind of cut them off from Mount Lawley and that end of Beaufort Street. So I think this is worthy of having a broader discussion, but there may be as many people support this in the community as there are people who are opposed to it because they don't want to see more cul-de-sacs, and I think it deserves a much broader discussion, particularly if we're being asked to apply this to administration for a whole of city approach. So I won't support the amendment on that basis.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Councillor Castle, Councillor Loden, Councillor Gonchevsky, was your hand in the air? Yes? So can I just have a show of hands for the amendment? Councillor Castle, Councillor Loden, Councillor Gonchevsky, all those against, the rest of us. The amendment is lost. I'm going to go to the substantive. All those in favour of the substantive? All those against? The motion is lost. Is there a alternate that wishes to come forward? Yes, moved by Councillor Gonchevsky, seconded by Councillor Castle.
I think that the petitioners and those who've subsequently engaged with council and spoken in the chamber have raised three issues consistently with the city: traffic volume, particularly rat runners and heavy commercial vehicles, traffic speed, and the desire for a pedestrian-friendly environment. On the basis of the data presented, I think that the slow points proposed and the pedestrian under the previous item and the pedestrian refuge item would act to reduce speeds in the precinct, and the installation of what is the short-term scenario in the report as a group would likely reduce the number of non-residential road users who would just switch their rat run to the next street down. But I'm conscious of the that we didn't previously consult on a number of these slow points, and I think we should do that as a principle. And I think we should ultimately have the petitioners and community representatives to UMAG. I think this is something that's come up as a community budget submission on, I think, 2 occasions now, and I think and the community has invested a lot of their time to engage with this process. So I think whilst this does extend, once again, this process, I do think we are closer, and I do think that it is important that we hear the community voice through this. I possibly also have an amendment in relation to auditing the precinct around streetscape maintenance, street tree planting and lighting, just so that it is recorded in the in the item. But I'll see if there might be support for that. And that's all I'll say at this time.
Councillor Castle. Councillors? Councillor Loden?
I will try again. So I would like to move the following amendment, which is to request that administration as part of the integrated transport plan, examines the pros and cons to creating precincts that restrict through traffic and support traffic flow along main roads to create more pedestrian and bike-friendly environments. If I can get a seconder.
Seconded by Councillor Castle. Sorry, Councillor Layton, does it still mention the integrated transport plan as previous?
Yes. So
Yes.
so my intent here is to ensure that when we are looking at our integrated transport plan, we are looking at this as an option. I mean, in my mind, giving consideration is kind of similar wording, but I'm happy to change it to consider the pros and cons. I'm not saying that we should be doing this, but I think we need to think about how we would go about doing this in a consolidated way and answer that one way or the other. I do tend to agree that there are some clear examples where it wouldn't work. I don't think I'd particularly want my street to be turned into a cul-de-sac. It would be a nightmare to get anywhere. But there may be places where that does suit, and we haven't done that look across the whole city and actually said, where would this work and is this appropriate and is that what our residents want? We do hear from people quite often that they want this, that and the other, and we also hear people who say that they want through traffic. And I, to be honest, don't know what the consensus view of the community is, and I think the integrated transport plan is a good method to work out how that would work and work out what it is that the community actually wants so that we can move on. Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Look, I agree. My understanding of the wording when we debated this just 2 minutes ago was the same. That gives consideration doesn't mean that we say that that's going to be the solution, but that simply that's on the table as an option. And I think it is important that we are considering that in the broader plan, because what we find when we're discussing these precincts is that we look at them in a vacuum and then we're not really considering what the effect that precinct might have on the neighbouring precinct, on what precedents it might set in other areas of the city. So I do think it's important that we are considering those precinct approaches, and that may also include a consideration of the 40-kilometre trial and how that impacts on measures that we need to take. I don't think the answer is always going to be traffic, raised platforms, speed humps, cul-de-sacs and the like, but simply that we're taking a more holistic approach to it and looking at impacts beyond the borders of the precincts.
Councillors. Councillor Konchevsky.
Just quickly, I've changed my mind. I am really supportive of this now because we have had specific reference from people in this chamber who have requested this, and ultimately an outcome that we could absolutely put forward on this, if we weren't talking about ITP, would be that we request council investigate, and that and unfortunately, given that we're doing an ITP, the logical place for that investigation to occur, or through that mechanism and then be reported, is through that process. So I am supportive of this. I also would note that as access roads, their primary purpose is to provide access to abutting properties, and safety aspects should have priority over vehicle movement and function. So I think that we need to recognise that in certain streets this sort of approach could absolutely be applicable if implemented with a sort of an evidence and a rigorous-based approach. So I'm very supportive of this now.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Can I ask a question through you to the Executive Director of Infrastructure and Environment, please? In the absence of this, and forgive my ignorance, because in the absence of this amendment, couldn't I get an understanding of what the integrated transport strategy plan would be looking at in relation to the issues of rat running or some of those areas? In the absence of this amendment, what would we expect to see, and with the addition of the amendment, what would we expect to see that would be different to what we could otherwise expect?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. Obviously, the integrated transport plan isn't completed yet and is still being researched and developed. So I couldn't guarantee this was a specific action that would be included in the plan. However, I understand the logic, and it's definitely an approach that we could take, which is why administration has not opposed the amendment.
In summary, does the addition of this amendment, even though it's tacked on to the end of something relating to a specific request, this amendment effectively is council guaranteeing that the ITP looks at rat running? Is that a short summary of it?
Yeah, through you, Michael. I think what it means is the ITP won't give you the answer. The ITP will contain an action to look at precincts and traffic in the way described in the amendment.
Thank you.
Councillor Harley?
Just through you, Mayor, just a question to the Director. So I'm just interested to know with this, I don't support it, but I would like to know, given that there sounds like there will be support for this, about the resources that are going to be put into it. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit in terms of what these words mean about giving consideration. It sounds like how long is a piece of string. So what I'd like to know from administration is what would the approach be? Would it be whole of city? Would you go through the city map and have a look and draw some details on the map about where administration thinks there's a pro or a con in regards to a road closure or etc. So I'd just like to get an idea about what the scope of this means, because this is more than just words in a plan and more than just words tapped onto an amendment. It's actually an action. So I would really like to know, through you, Mayor, about what that means for us.
Yeah, so through you, Mayor Cole. So the likely outcome of that action being contained in the Integrated Transport Plan would be that administration would identify or break the city into a series of zones, and those zones would be investigated. So we collect data about traffic speed, volume, the usability of the roads, etc. And that would then allow us to model potential interventions to achieve, the outcome, which would be to reduce rat running and keep traffic on the main roads, etc. So it would be an ongoing project that would deal with the city in a series of zones or precincts. That would be my suggestion.
Through you, Mem, my question still is, what does that mean in terms of your resources and in terms of your time, and how will you engage with members of the public who own properties and live on the streets? Or is it about administration sitting around saying that looks like that might be a good place? So I want to know what the evidence base is. I am very concerned that we take a project which is a North Perth traffic study and we add on an amendment which, in my view, requires administration to do something which is an unplanned activity, unbudgeted activity. I'm assuming there'll be resources, there'll be time involved in this. I don't know, you're in a better position to judge that. And then talks about it as though it's an approach. Councillor Loden said he doesn't know what the community view is on this. Guess what? Neither do I. I know what the community view is from friends and family that I speak to about their frustrations, but I just don't think this is a good way, personally, for the City of Vincent to approach this. I think that if council believe that there is a problem with rat running or we need more cul-de-sacs, then I think we should have a proper conversation. And I don't believe this keeps faith with our commitment to engage with our community and transparent decision making and genuine consultation and listening to our community by tacking on something onto an amendment like this. And if those maps, which are drawn up into squares with squiggles and comments, were made public and members of the public knew that our administration tasked by council were out there talking about which way, what roads could be closed, I don't personally think that that's a good look for council. And I think this was worthy of a much broader discussion than tacked on to an amendment at this time of night at a council meeting. I think it was worthy of being taken to a workshop. I think it's worthy of the UMAG group coming up with something, a more formalised proposal. So I do not support this at all, and I'm still wanting a little bit more information for the record about what administration feels this may mean in terms of this now being a priority action, which it will be if this is voted up. What does this mean for us in administration in terms of our priorities? Who's going to do the work? How long will it take?
Can I just add to that? Because my observation is that the response from the Director is that we're going to look at precincts and look at precincts. I think it actually needs to be high. If it is going through, it needs to be higher level. It actually needs to look at what are the pros and cons of interventions of this nature before you actually start to carve up sections and look at where you might restrict roads or where you might do diagonal closures or do one-way entrance and no right turn, etc. I think where I'm coming from, and as an UMAG member, I'm just going to put that out there, is that we actually should be just examining whether this type of treatment, because we do have an issue with rat running, that's clear, but is this type of treatment the way that we should go? And for me, it's not about a precinct basis yet. It would be about actually doing a bit more of a research around use of these sorts of interventions. So sorry, you were asking a question, but for me, I just was seeking to elevate this body of work.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy for that intervention. I guess that's the view that you've just put from the Chair. The Director's put a different view. I think that there's quite a gap in between those. I guess it doesn't move away from the point that I'm making, which is this comes to us, to Council. This goes out to the community in terms of consultation. We are asking Council for the administration to keep faith with what we've committed to, which is to go back and inform the petitioners of the council decision. How does this group of people get to essentially from their issue, how does that turn into our council asking administration to look at a whole of city approach? I think there's a really big leap from this project and this set of traffic issues with this set of petitioners to suddenly making this something that it will be a priority, and I'm wanting to know where it sits within our priorities. I agree with the Mayor in terms of the overall question from a philosophical approach, from a community approach. What do all these traffic treatments mean? And they mean different things to different people in different parts of our city. And we talk about rat running, even when normal day users are finding their local shortcut, which they're perfectly entitled to do. So I don't think this sits within this. I think it is a very big request for something that was a North Perth traffic study with very specific outcomes, with a very specific set of petitioners. I don't see a petition before us from our community asking for traffic interventions. I don't see it, and that's what I would want to see, a much broader community view before something like this, before I could agree to something like this.
Can I just ask a question of the Executive Director? In terms of the issue of rat running, is there anything in the ITP draft that is already looking at this issue and ways to address rat running without applying any methodology, just to actually say this is an issue and will be examined through the ITP?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might answer that one. Yes, the issue of rat running has, as you'd probably be aware, come up a fair bit through the community consultation and through the UMAG. So it's definitely one of the key things that we'll be looking at through the ITP, including this amendment would, I guess, just ensure that we are considering it, but I can guarantee that we are definitely considering rat running and the use of different infrastructure and education tools to try and deter that from happening in future.
And yeah, through you, Michael, if I can add a little bit to try and answer some of the questions. Obviously, the ITP will be proposed and will be accepted by Council or not, containing certain actions. My answer was making the assumption that the approach was approved, and that was one of the ways in which to deal with that action. So if Council was to want administration to deal with the city on a precinct-by-precinct approach, what I outlined was one of the technical ways to do that. That doesn't mean that when you see the ITP you'll actually agree with that action. That is a matter for Council.
And just in terms of the ITP process, at what point will Council have an opportunity to engage with that again? Like, is that coming to a workshop, or what's the next step for that process?
Through Mayor Cole, I haven't looked at it in the last couple of weeks, but the last thing that I was aware of was it was going around for internal administration comment. All of those would be compiled and sent back to the consultant to make some more changes. and then following that it would be presented back to the council, so potentially a couple of weeks.
Do you mean would it come to a council workshop first?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think I've already spoken on this amendment by interjecting on you, Councillor Harley. So hopefully my line of questioning might suggest an alternate way forward. Is there any further comments on this amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? All those against? I vote against. Use my casting vote to vote against on the basis that we discuss this through the ITP process, which does not mean I'm opposed. It just means procedurally, I believe that's a better way to do it. Okay, we still have to vote on the substantive. Oh, have a further amendment coming through.
I'm so sorry, but I just think, I note that there was some commentary. I'm going to put an amendment and then I'll talk to it if I get a seconder. Wording possibly to be slightly adjusted to, as one of the dot points, probably somewhere between 5 and 6, that council we undertake an audit of the precinct in the 1920 financial year to identify streetscape condition, street tree planting opportunities and street lighting, gaps in street lighting, or and offer petitioners and residents the opportunity to provide input to this process. Sorry, terrible wording.
Is there a seconder? We'd like to. Can you walk us through that again, please, Councillor Gonchevsky? Just a flag. We're going to have to vote at 10 to go beyond.
Undertake an audit of the precinct in the 2019-2020 financial year to identify streetscape condition, opportunities for street tree planting, and I'm trying to think street lighting standards or compliance with current street lighting standards, and invites residents to... Oh, it's already on the screen. There we go. That's great.
The CEO has requested, could it be a desktop audit, because it sounds like it's going to be a lot of work.
Or perhaps if I got a seconder, I'd be able to mention the fact that we're actually going to be doing this, a lot of this in the financial year already, because that was in the briefing notes. But I can get to that point.
Are you happy with the wording? No. We don't have the wording yet. Is there sufficient information for me to find out whether this could be seconded? Otherwise it will lapse and then we can move on. It's seconded by Councillor Loden.
Thank you. these were issues that were raised by people in this chamber in relation to contributing to their sense of amenity and how they feel about their local area. And I don't believe at this point in time, given that what we've got before us really relates to traffic, that amenity issue has been addressed. I note that there is, in the briefing notes, we were advised that the next full footpath condition assessment is due in 2020, inclusive of the study area, so that's going to happen. And I also note from the briefing notes that in light of issues raised around greening, an audit of suitable locations for additional tree planting will be undertaken in 1920 for consideration in 2021. So on the basis of that, the only thing I'm putting in there is lighting, and this was raised previously through discussions with residents, and I'm not seeking to, as I said, extend the city's obligation beyond what we would generally do where people have talked to us about lighting. I'm just seeking to ensure that we have enough trees, footpaths that aren't cracked, and lights that comply with standard. But also, again, it's about circling back to what the community are telling us, and they talk to us about traffic volume, traffic speed and amenity. And I just want to ensure that in order to potentially be able to put this to bed at some point, that we address all of the issues that I think are raised. That's all.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I support the amendment. We have, to this point in time, just solely talked about traffic, and that has been raised as part of that petition, and it was also raised in the gallery here last week as well. So I see this as a good way to do that, and the fact that we're already undertaking these activities, it makes sense to do it with that at the same time.
Councillors, any comment? Councillor Fotakis.
It's just more a question for clarification whether that audit pertains to a particular geographical area, or are we talking about citywide?
Just the precinct that relates, so I'm just tying it to the North Perth Traffic Study precinct area that we have. I think it said in the precinct? It says in the precinct, so I presume that's clear, yeah.
Councillors, any further comments or questions?
Sorry, I'm tempted just to slide this through because we're tired and I want to go home, but I really just want to ask a question about when the petitioners put their petition forward, were these elements that Councillor Gontaszewski's added in to do with lighting, footpaths and trees, were they part of what the petitioners were looking for? I don't recall the petition in particular.
Through you, Michael, if I can answer. We did attach the petition to the briefing notes, and some of the wording talks about amenity, so it is beyond just traffic and speed. So I think it does fit with what the residents were expecting to some extent. Although traffic and speed was the main issue they raised, they were talking about wider issues about amenity. And when we did do the public consultation at North Perth Town Hall, people did come and report things like broken footpaths and pram ramps, etc. to us. And we've done some of that work already, so it's definitely a theme within the community.
It is in the briefing notes. I can read it out if you like. It's not that long. It talks about that the undersigned respectfully request Council to consider matters below: safety of our local streets due to excessive volume and speed of some vehicles, including regular daily and nightly use of some of our streets, particularly Elmer Road, by heavy commercial vehicles. The WA road hierarchy lists our street as access streets, and therefore they are not intended for regular use by heavy vehicles and through traffic, including rat runners. This has been an ongoing problem, exacerbated by the traffic network changes, such as turning restrictions on major roads. The move towards safe, active streets highlights the community desire for local streets to perform broader functions and act as places which people, children and adults can use safely, and into which the drivers of motor vehicles enter with knowledge and care. We request the City recognise our streets as a connected network and therefore engage with all residents of our precinct to develop acceptable measures to make our streets safe and more livable. Any further comments on the amendment? Does administration wish to comment? Is that, in terms of resources, etc., is that something that could be easily met?
Yeah, so through you, Nicole, 2 of the audits mentioned, footpaths and trees, we've already committed to, so that won't be a problem. And a lighting audit we could do with the existing budgets. So if we did the audits the coming financial year, we would use that information to feed it in next year's budget, which would then be a council decision about what they use the audit information to decide upon. So it is achievable within existing budgets.
Okay, thanks for that. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments on this item? I'm going to put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda is probably our most significant of the night. It's 11.4, the adoption of the 1920 annual budget. This is an absolute majority decision. Can I please have a mover and seconder? Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. One of the pieces of feedback from the community on this was around that rate increase should not be greater than CPI. Unfortunately for local government, CPI is not a good measure of what our cost base are. And as I'm sure other councils are aware, one of the significant parts of our cost is waste, which goes up every year because of an increased landfill levy, and also because we're part of the Mindarie Regional Council, which has decreasing volumes of waste going into it, and but a fixed cost to run it. So that constantly provides upward pressure on our rates base, and our waste collection is a significant part of our waste of our rates. Interestingly, one of the ways you can address this is by having a separate waste charge, and I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
I'll be brief. This budget has a whole bunch in it, and I'm very pleased to see there's a number of things that relate to areas that I am very supportive of, and that I think we've made improvements on in last few years. Public open space, asset management, access and equity, and young people. Where master planning Woodville Reserve and Robertson Park, working with residents, park users, sporting clubs and community groups to maximise the amenity of these spaces and increase access to public open space in key areas of the city. Implementing the first phase of the Banks Reserve Master Plan. And as per our commitment to the community, I look forward to additional engagement as we progress through this design phase. We're going to continue to support the activation of HQ, and we're going to be we're starting to treat the Leederville skate park like the asset it is, developing an asset management plan and setting aside funds for needed renewal to the skate infrastructure. We're going to be upgrading change rooms to the Charles Verriard facility to provide improved facilities for the women and girls who train and play there throughout the year. And I could go on, but this process is one of the most involved things that a councillor does, and it is an opportunity for us to really see everything that is delivered. So thank you to administration for their assistance through this process, and I'm very pleased to support this item.
Councillors? Okay, look, I do have to talk about the budget. I know that it's late and everyone's tired, but we've talked a lot about things that aren't as substantial as our budget and as important, and this is on the public record, so you will have to bear with me while I talk about the budget. There are some key themes coming out from this budget, and I think that some of those are around great service for our residents, better parks and play, economic activation and safer streets. One of the key items in the budget is the new community hub that we're looking at locating near the Vincent Library, so that we have that more personal face-to-face service with our residents and ratepayers, so that it's almost like a The CEO talks about a concierge service, but a very personalised service where people can come in and be directed in a number of different ways and just get really good customer service up front. So I think that's really critical, and part of that community hub is bringing our rangers back from the Osborne Park depot into the heart of Leederville, where I think we'll see a much more visible presence because rangers will be coming and going from Leederville. You'll see their cars. The CEO's even talked about getting rangers on electric bikes. I'm not sure if he's actually had that conversation with the Rangers yet, Director. But the Rangers have certainly talked about the fact that when they were based in Leederville, they used to walk the streets down in Leederville more. So I think this is also about providing, greater surveillance, more time spent in Vincent, more visibility in Vincent. So that's really great. Parks and play is remaining a huge priority for our budget. Our body of work on open space continues. It's an ongoing commitment from Council. And as part of open space, we'll be rolling out a new nature playground, which will be quite spectacular at Banks Reserve, as well as an active zone or multi-use court. And we'll continue to roll out our popular pop-up play trials that are happening across the city of Vincent, and also doing some other things like upgrading the Braithwaite Hall. So we're moving from Phase 1 Lesser Hall to Phase 2, which is the upper hall. So also looking after those key buildings in our reserves. Once again, we've had a fantastic response from our community for community budget submissions, and all up with funding $340,000 of our community's proposals. And many of those, again, meeting Council's priorities focus on parks, which is interesting. We did have a Vincent tool library put forward, but when I went through all of the community budgets, and they are a separate item on the agenda, but there's a lot of focus on parks, nature play, the pump trail and the bike trail and pump track, even a netball ring, fencing, pathways to meander through our beautiful reserves. And there's also quite a lot of future thinking and responsibility around this budget. So a lot of what we're putting funding into is around sustainable outcomes for our future. So if you look at things like the fact that we've got $500,000 going straight into reserve to fund our FOGO initiatives, that food organics and garden organics, a third bin. That's a sizable chunk of funds. I think I worked out that would be approximately a 1.4% rate increase just in that money going to fund 50% of bins to be rolled out. To go 50% of the cost of all bins to be rolled out in October 2020, which we are expecting to see approximately 50% diversion from landfill resulting from that. Solar panels, thank you for your advocacy, Councillor Dan Loden. It's starting to pay off. 10% reduction in power bills estimated for this financial year, and we're also reducing debt quite significantly by paying a significant balloon payment of debt on the DSR Sport and Recreation building, I think $4.5 million, yes, going into that. So that's a significant debt reduction. So, and we're also spending money on our old buildings. It's one of the things that continues to be a cost to this city, and that we've got ageing infrastructure, all of the same era, and some significant costs there. Economic times do remain tough. If you look at what's happening for business in the community. So it's very critical for us to keep that economic activation strong, to keep rates low. We're looking at 1.5% for commercial, and to give Beaufort Street that heart start that it really needs. So we've got an action plan particularly targeted to Beaufort Street, which has a range of different things, but the key thing is actually the vacancy project and trying to fill those spaces and gaps in shop fronts. We will continue to invest in our nuts and bolts that I think we do really well in Vincent, so talking about things like footpaths, roads and drainage, and we'll continue to roll out new trees and adopt a verge and all the greening that we love to do in the City of Vincent, where we've retained our $300,000 commitment towards that. So they were some of the key things. I think fees and charges are also remaining low. There's a lot that are not going up, and I think that where we have seen some increase in fees and charges, it's really just around waste charges, given, as Councillor Loden has explained, waste is a cost that is rising. There's no increase in hire and halls. I do note there is an increase for weddings, and it's always the wedding tax that seems to plague poor people getting married. No increase in seasonal hire sports grounds, and Beatty Park memberships, which I understand are highly competitive and already low, are going up by just 1%. Just they were some of the key things to mention, and I think that also if there is an amendment on the table about rates, so I'll hold off on any comments on that. So are there any further comments or any amendments? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just wanted to make a comment. I did request for some work to be done in the last week, which I received, which I thought was really interesting information, and that is the actual percentage of properties that are on the minimum rate. A lot of the discussion around rates increases or what is charged in rates tends to be based on what it was last year or the year before. I personally subscribe more so to a fee-for-service model and understanding what is a base level of service. So I just thought I would make comment about a couple of interesting facts. So if you look at the data we received in the report, generally rates shows us how we sit in terms of the minimum rate. That's generally how it's presented. So Vincent last year ranked number 5. And so just looking at us and the 4 councils above us, so 33.48% of Vincent properties pay the minimum rate, as compared to the City of Perth, who sit at number 1 on the lowest minimum, 5.44% of properties. So whilst they're number 1 with the lowest minimum, they're actually the second lowest of all of the metropolitan councils in terms of number of properties on the minimum rate, which effectively means the minimum rate is an irrelevance because nobody actually ever pays it. So, and similarly above us, so East Fremantle 8.11%, Cottesloe 8.69%, and Belmont is at 25%. So I think it's a really critical way in which we as a community look at the minimum rate. Yes, it's more than double what it was certainly when I walked into the chamber, and so you can look at that as slugging the people who can least afford to pay it is the way it gets presented to us when people complain about it. But if you look at fee for service, we're hovering around $23.6 to $23.60 thereabouts per week as the minimum rate for what we charge. And if you look at the service, in my view, that people get for that level of investment in their rates, I think we certainly stand tall at Vincent. I do note that our neighbours at Stirling and, oddly enough, Rockingham have the highest proportion of properties that are on the minimum rate, but effectively our minimum rate now covers a third of the population of Vincent, which I think is whilst it hasn't been designed in that way, I think that's a number I'm personally quite comfortable with, that the fee for service that we charge in terms of the lowest level of rates covers 1/3 of our population. That probably sits about right in terms of what people expect of us as a council. You can't move amendments, can you? All right, so I'll move that one. So I shall move the amendment on the blue, which effectively moves changes so from the advertised increase in residential minimum to 2.9%, takes that down. The commercial vacant, residential and other takes that down to 2.7% for residential, and it effectively matches the increase across all 3 categories, and has a net effect of $60,000 and $60,045 decrease in the projected surplus.
So it's a 2.7% increase for the residential minimum and the residential rates, and and it reduces the
1.5 across other categories.
Yeah, 1.5 minimum minimum and other minimum and rates increase in both the other and commercial categories.
That is correct.
Yeah. Is there a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Gonchevsky. Do you wish to speak to it?
Look, I think so. The mover spoke about people looking at CPI as a measure. There's no question. It's a difficult economic climate for everybody. Wage growth is low. The ability of people to be able to afford any increases across any of their essential bills is understood. The basket of goods that we do talk about it fairly often in here at this time of year, but the basket of goods that's assessed in the CPI bears no relationship at all to the costs of local government. And I think that in general at Vincent we have for the small size that we are geographically and in relative staff terms or relative council terms. I think that we're asked a lot of us, and I think that what we ask of people in return is reasonable. And again, back to specifically on the minimums, I think that whilst it may be considered to be a larger than CPI increase, largely we are supplying a level of service that, as I said, is hovering around that $23.60 per week, which I'm quite comfortable in justifying to any of our ratepayers.
Councillor Kondrashevsky, do you wish to speak to it? Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Just to briefly state that look, we were looking at a surplus of roughly $66,000, which wasn't allocated, and that all it took was to use up the majority of that surplus, and I think that we have previously aimed to have a zero surplus where it's not, it's not set aside for anything that must happen. We have set aside, as I mentioned, a lot of money towards FOGO. We've got a responsible budget, and I think that when you look at the difficulties in terms of the economic conditions, which just don't seem to be able to recover, it would be a hard ask to say we're going to have a $66,000 surplus, but we have this opportunity to actually reduce the rates. So. Also, when I considered the fact that looking at the index, I know that the submitters who asked us to either reduce or just increase by CPI, when you look at the local government cost index, that was at 1.8%, and I think I previously mentioned that the FOGO savings alone was sitting at about 1.4%. So when you consider 2.7% for residents, that's less than the combined local government index plus the cost of saving towards our implementing FOGO. And look, I think we're just trying to do the reasonable thing without taking too much of an increase from our residents, whilst being responsible about our future commitments, which will deliver lasting impacts for our community. So it's not a showy budget, it's not a flashy budget, it's a budget which is about future thinking and delivering those key initiatives towards that and better outcomes for our community. And this is affordable without impacting any of our core services or the services that in Vincent have become core services in addition to roads and rubbish. So I think this is a response to economic times while still being able to do what we need to deliver for our community. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments on the budget? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. We have officially adopted the 2019-2020 budget. Well done. Thank you very much also to John Padden and Venetia, our manager and our special projects person. You've done an exceptional job, and we thank you sincerely for all of your hard work and many hours that have gone into this. Okay. Moving on, 11.5 amendments to the Parking and Parking Facilities Local Law 2007. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Kondrashevsky.
I'll move, with the permission of the seconder, move the amendment on the dark sunflower.
Are you happy to move the amendment on the dark sunflower? Thank you.
So I'll be super quick. So we had some brief discussion last week about the disappearance of the 24-hour provision. If anyone wishes to, I'm happy to share. Mick and I are happy to share the pages of discussion about the appropriate adjective. We settled on the word restricts, but effectively what this does is, whilst it does introduce a level of subjectivity, the issue with the 24-hour clause, and it's been discussed many times, so somebody, FIFO worker for example, goes away for 2 weeks and they come back and find their vehicle impounded because it was parked in the same place for 24 hours. Clearly not a tenable situation. On the other side of it, some of the many examples, the example I think I highlighted last week was an issue with a vehicle that had been purchased for a family member whilst they were learning to drive and is effectively parked in the same spot for 7 or 8 months whilst the person learns to or takes their lessons, and that particular location that they chose was outside of somebody else's residential property. I'm assured that the term restricts lawful use of a public place is appropriate for this to give rangers the ability to intervene in that situation. I think the important thing for me is also the administration comment, where it's not just a matter of issuing infringements or impounding, but it actually gives the opportunity to go and open a discussion. And at the extreme end, there is something contained in the local law to enable the rangers to actually have the ability to infringe at the end of the day, but it works on both sides, gets rid of the frivolous complaints, but also enables those situations to be resolved amicably. So I seek your support for the amendment. Sorry, I should also note that the critical thing for me, the wording was potentially a bit clunky, but the fact this goes out for consultation with the local law, which is for a period of 3 months, it gives us a chance to at least review it if there's any feedback or if we come up with a better way to incorporate the same principle.
I have a question. I'm supportive. I just want to make sure that, do we need to actually, does the recommendation actually need to also amend attachment 1 with the proposed wording as well as amending the recommendation, or is it sufficient just to amend the recommendation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in my view, first of all, we have actually amended attachment 1, so that hasn't been attached to the agenda at this stage, but it was prepared at the same time as the amendment this afternoon. Having said that, and I'm happy to take advice from the Acting Manager of Governance, I'm certainly comfortable that the amended resolution gives the effect that we'll amend the attachment prior to advertising.
Look, I'm happy with where it's landed. I agree that the wording, I think you have to have some discretion in these circumstances, but I think the wording around restricting the lawful use of a public place ultimately seems reasonable on the face of it, and I'm happy to see what comes back through consultation.
Any further comments on the motion before you? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments? No? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? The item is carried. Next item is 11.6, City Homelessness Framework Committee Draft Action Plan. Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Fotakis.
With the seconder's permission, I'll move the amendment. On the white. Thank you. I've never seen a white one before. We've obviously had a lot of amendments. The amendment is to request that administration provides an update on implementation of the City Homelessness Framework Committee Action Plan and the broader WA 10-year strategy on homelessness by December 2019. So currently the strategy has been consulted on, has been developed, and is going to come back at some point in time. This is the overarching framework which informs the City's Homelessness Framework Committee Action Plan, which should be completed prior to December. I'm very interested to see how that plan is put together, and I'd like to see a report come back to Council if everybody else is willing, particularly to understand how this is being measured, what the target's going to be, and how over time they're proposing to adapt the strategy as they trial different things as well. Thank you.
Councillor Fotakis.
Can I speak to the substantive after dealing with the amendment?
Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare the amendment carried. Back to the substantive. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had another thank you to give to the city staff for their work in this very critical area. As far as I'm aware, that the city homelessness framework is the first time that all the key stakeholders working in the homelessness sector have come together like this, and the City of Vincent are amongst those key stakeholders. I think whilst great work has been done in this area, it was really clear that things needed to be done differently if we as a community and in government were to make significant inroads to end homelessness. The committee identified a need for greater sector collaboration, identifying gaps in services, and services, albeit well-intentioned, have been ad hoc, and we've seen a number of problems in our community stemming from, like I said, well-intentioned community members and groups distributing food and other items, usually in the same location, and World Square's been one of those key locations where we've seen a number of issues. And at the same time that many of our organisations have struggled for resources for key services. The new Goodwill accreditation system that the city's been key to working on will hopefully help remedy that moving forward. So again, thanks to the staff and well done.
Thank you. Any further comments? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Next item is 12.1 is the corporate business plan progress update. Can I have a mover, please? Moved Councillor Gonchevsky, seconded Councillor Loden.
So I'm going to move an amendment, just because that seems to be the favour of the night, because I would like to move an amendment that says that council, new paragraph 1, receives the progress report for the City of Vincent corporate business plan, etc., as included as attachment 1, and then point 2 notes that an updated corporate business plan will be presented to the August council meeting.
Can I just go to the seconder to see if you're happy to move with the amendment? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Just that the corporate business plan is part of the integrated planning and reporting framework, and it's a rolling 4-year plan. It's required to be updated every year. And since 2016, we've updated it in June and July of each year. I am aware that we are going through a process of reviewing the content and format of the CBP, and look forward to having some engagement with that through the workshop process prior to it coming back to, hopefully, a meeting in August. Any comment on this? Okay, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Sorry, that was the amendment, so I have to now move the substantive. Is there any further comments on the substantive? I'll put it. All those in favour, declare the motion not carried. So that brings us to item 12.2. We have brought...
Just going to get the word. Yes.
Is that okay? Okay, we're moving on to item 12.2, Community Budget Submissions 1920. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Loden. Councillor Loden does not wish to speak to it. Toppelberg has said he doesn't wish to speak to it. Is there any comment? Given that I have already spoken about this during the adoption of the budget, I have nothing further to add other than thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, declare it carried. We can ask Councillor Castle to return.
Madam Mayor.
Next item is 12.4, termination of Multicultural Services Centre of WA's sublease of the Wellness Centre at Woodville Reserve, 10 Farmer Street, North Perth. Mover, Councillor Gonchevsky, seconded Councillor Toppelberg.
So I'm having really good ideas late in the piece, and I just have a question in relation to this item, possibly an amendment. Just in terms of when the expressions of interest for the short-term lease of the building from community organisations and report back to council is expected to be finalised, and whether we could add that date in. So that's a question first. When the EOI process for the sublease might be is anticipated to be completed.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we don't have a date on that because it may be the case that we would have to work quite hard to find expressions of interest for potential tenants for this, so we can, and there's not a huge urgency on that in terms of revenue, so we can certainly commit before the end of the year.
Would it be appropriate to put in no later than December 2019?
Yep.
So just to amend, I'd like to put forward an amendment to point 2, and after report back to council by December 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, Chair, point of order. It's 10 o'clock.
Okay, it is 10 o'clock, so under the meeting procedures I have to seek approval from council to proceed beyond 10 p.m. So it is a procedural motion, and I would ask for a mover. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski. All those in favour of proceeding beyond 10 o'clock, please raise your hands. All of those against. I note Councillor I should have voted no because I'm too tired to talk. Councillor Harley and Councillor Loden have voted against. But majority rules, and we will persevere, hopefully very, very quickly.
No, I'm sticking with December.
Okay, so have we got the words of the amendment on the table?
December 2019, yeah.
Councillor Toppelberg, you seconded it. Okay, do we need to discuss it or can we just vote?
Sorry, just because the reason I called the item forward, I may as well ask now. Just, it says a 2 to 3 year. Yes, I did. It says a 2 to 3 year sublease, but then contained in the body of the reports, this is the question of the CEO, talks about it being a 1 year plus 1 plus 1. You then spoke about the potential difficulty in attracting a tenant. Can we just get some understanding? My understanding, reading the recommendation, is that we're going out for 3 years. I would imagine if we say that you've got potential to be kicked out after 1 year, that we will significantly restrict the number of people that we will significantly restrict the number of people that are potential tenants. So can we just, I just want to get some understanding what the EOR process will be, how wide we will go, how it'll be advertised, and whether the intent, if someone comes along with a 3-year proposal, that is what would come back to council.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm looking at the Acting Executive Director of Community Business Services for support here, but we essentially know all the potential community groups within the City of Vincent and other potential community groups that would want to the City of Vincent, and we've got good contacts with them, and we'll approach them directly, and sometimes we're approached to be asked if we have a space or a part of a building that would be suitable for all or part of a group or a community group. So that is essentially a matchmaking exercise, and we do that one-on-one with the large number of community groups we have. And if the Acting Director nods his head at that, it might be
Through you, Mayor Cole, all I will add is the rationale behind the 1 plus 1 plus 1 year option was initially just to give administration flexibility, given the fact that we're embarking upon the Woodville Reserve Master Plan next year. However, as the CEO has mentioned, there's a number of organisations that have approached us and a number that we've got in mind, and the benefit of the EOI process is that we can negotiate a potential way forward before putting a lease or a licence option to council.
Councillors, any further on this item? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Okay, we're back to the substantive. Any further on this item? No. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? The item is carried. Next item is 12.6, appointment of an alternative member for the Mindarie Regional Council meeting for the 4th of July 2019. An absolute majority decision required. At the briefing, Councillor Gondaszewski indicated she would be prepared to attend. Is that still the case? So can we please put the motion with Councillor Gondaszewski as the attending council member? Thank you, Councillor Gondaszewski. Unless there's any other desire to cause an election. Okay, unless there's any debate? No, I'll put the item. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. Oh, didn't have it, sorry. This is becoming a disaster. So that's moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Gondaszewski. All those in favour? Thank you very much. The item is carried. 12.6. 12.7, report and minutes of Audit Committee meeting held on the 11th of June 2019. Under our meeting procedures, we must go to the Chair to move the item. Councillor Loden. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Toppelberg. Do you wish to speak to the item, Councillor Loden?
No.
Councillor Toppelberg, do you wish to speak to it? Any comment? I'll put the item. All those in favour? Declare the item carried. That leaves us with one item for the evening, which again is an absolute majority decision required. It's item 13.1, a notice of motion from myself, a request to modify delegated authority register for waiving cash in lieu of car parking for up to 5 bays. I'm very excited because I'm allowed to move notices of motion, so I'm moving this motion. Can I have a seconder, please? Seconded, Councillor Murphy. I'll speak to it very quickly, but with changes of use, we need to make sure that businesses who are having wanting to establish and have lots of upfront fees like fit outs and starting to pay for leases, but then if they have a long approvals process because of change of use where administration under our existing policy believes that cash in lieu can be waived reasonably in line with that policy. At the moment there's no delegation to allow that to happen, and every item where cash in lieu is waived must come to council in order to keep these changes of uses happening quickly and to cut red tape, the old red tape mantra, and to keep businesses' costs down. The objective of this motion is to allow for that waiver to happen under delegated authority. I think that there is talk in planning reform at a state level that there's going to be a move away from all these permitted changes of use, and that this will be one of the first waves that might come forward through planning reform, and that this may not even be an issue in the future. So I think we just need to keep ahead of the game and make sure that where changes of use need to happen in our town centres and other bustling areas of our community, that we need to see them happen quickly. Councillor Murphy, do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, just fully support it. I think, the more of this, obviously, the better in terms of making it easy for local businesses. I believe the City of Subi have even gone one step further with their change of use policy, and I don't even think, I think it's just, they just require a letter or something. It's really loose, but that's probably the way that it's going to, by the sounds of it, it's the direction that it'll be moving with the state, so fully supportive of this.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the notice of motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. There being no further items on the agenda, I declare the meeting closed at 8 minutes past 10 o'clock. Thank you.